Commission. Agenda and additional copies of staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you've not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about this process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located on the table in the hallway. If you wish to testify, please fill out a yellow comment card like it was just handed to me. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the January 14th meeting, which was in the meeting packet. Any comments from the council?
None.
No.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the minutes from January 14th, 2020.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Are there any informational items from the staff?
I have one. On Monday, the window for receiving CPIC applications closed. We had 29 applicants, 4 of which were former CPAC members. So we've got a pretty good collection of candidates. That information is being given to the council tonight. I mean, we were just able to compile everything. It closed yesterday. Council will then be looking at the candidates and determining whether or not they want to hold interviews or appoint members.
Okay. Thank you. Again, I want to thank Commissioner Edge for volunteering to be the commission's representative to that group, and for Commissioner Loosevelt to be the backup. Thank you again.
May I also say one more thing, and this is for our commissioners. Scott Stauffer sent out our update for filing. So for those of you who may not have had to have done it before, but it is majorly important that you get that done, because if you don't, then people can say that the Planning Commission's rulings do not confirm or something like that. It's a public notice, a record that you don't have any inherent conflicts of interest. So please remember to fill that out. I always wait until after I do my taxes, but.
Thank you for that reminder, Commissioner Hemer. I would also encourage you to not wait till April 15th, because you may have other things on your mind that day. Okay, this is an opportunity to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. Tonight's agenda is the comprehensive plan. So if you want to comment on an item tonight, it should not be part of the agenda. If you wish to, does anyone wish to comment on an item that is not on tonight's agenda? Mr. Kraska, you're recognized for a period of 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Massey. Thank you, Commissioners. I have 2 articles here to pass out. The first one is about, it's from the local newspaper, some articles about parking. It has different viewpoints about that. All I'm going to say about that is, and this isn't general commentary about any land use decision that this commission makes, because your bylaws state that you are here to articulate the community's values and visions. So let's base parking decisions on reality, not just ideology. The Trump Clean Water Act is going to significantly cut back protections for all kinds of waterways, which have impacts for especially states like New Mexico and Arizona. Last meeting 2 weeks ago, one of the commissioners cited a study that had to do with heat island effects in Brisbane, Australia. I looked up the study, but I would urge the commissioners to accurately cite relevant science that's relevant to the Pacific Northwest or this area's climate. Australia is a subtropical climate. This is a temperate climate. That study actually does note that temperate climates have more increases in temperature based on density and development than in ones like Australia. But the overall essence of all those studies says that is a given, that as we develop and create more density, we have less open space, less vegetation. Therefore, we have more heat island effects. That can be mitigated through a variety of means, which are important, and you guys addressed some of those very well in this report. But let's not ignore the fact that, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't increase density or that we don't need to, but when we increase density, we increase heat. That's very well established, and I also emailed some of the commissioners and EPA reports about that. I hope you received those emails. Staff comments for Mr. Trapp, who happens to be a neighbor of mine almost down the street, an elderly gentleman who, nice guy who spoke at the last meeting. He mentioned crimes such as rape and shootings that have occurred in Portland. Staff says that they disagree with him about the relationship between additional density and increases in crime. Then they say that the city values public input, but in the interest of respect and civility, that it would encourage members of the public to avoid language that might be construed as racist, classist, or otherwise discriminatory. Please don't imply that citizens who are concerned about increased density are somehow racist, classist, or discriminatory if they have concerns. Mr. Trapp's comments about crime in Portland made no mention of race or class, so in the interest of respect and civility, we ask staff to cease and desist such mischaracterizations of our citizens. And then finally, I would urge that this not become a land grab. I know this is a national trend. I know we have a real estate developer as president right now, and that this trend is happening globally, and there is an overpopulation issue with human beings. But just because a community isn't totally willing to give everything away to wealthy, predominantly white male developers and investors doesn't make it classist. In fact, just the contrary. We would encourage city officials to avoid decisions that further enrich the wealthy at the expense of retirees on fixed incomes, such as those living in Milwaukee, and people of color. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clark?
Yep.
Oh, I was, actually, the comp plan public hearing, is that, can I give comment then, or do I do it now?
The comment period for the comp plan is closed.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I wasn't sure because it said public hearing.
Yeah, it's a public hearing for any items not on the agenda tonight.
Oh, okay. I guess well, my comment was on the comp plan, so do you take any more testimony or clarification or something?
Well, I will allow you to speak, Mr. Clark, but it won't become part of the public record.
Okay. I just wanted to point also, Mr. Kraska shared the EPA study that showed that, yes, indeed, heat island effects are very significant, and in fact, they're just as significant as the rise in global temperatures. Now, the thing about Milwaukee's comp plan, you may try to influence or affect the global environment, but that's way beyond this city's domain. We have infinitesimal type of emissions in a relative scale, so we cannot change the climate in Milwaukee without a lot of other things happening, and there's a high risk that probably doesn't happen. So what we're left with in Milwaukee is heat island effects if they're not mitigated. And that's, I don't think you can glance over that, a fact, because we become the losers in that, the residents of Milwaukee. The second point is on zoning. You focused on discrimination and things like that, and that has occurred for sure. And there's been a long civil rights history and federal laws against that now. But a big purpose of zoning is to allow people to buy into a neighborhood or continue living there based on a promise or covenant-like situation that their neighborhoods are going to all of a sudden rapidly be changed out to more multiplexes and stuff like that. So that's what zoning has a big purpose doing. And so I just hope you'll tread lightly on people in Milwaukee's single-family neighborhoods. And even some of my neighbors we've got more diversity now, and so my neighbors, we've got a diverse neighborhood too. So that's all I wanted to say is tread lightly on our single-family neighborhoods, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. The next agenda item is item CPA-2019-001. So this hearing on CPA 2019-001 is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider legislative amendments to the Comprehensive Plan Policy Document. The Commission initiated this hearing on January 14th, continued it to January 28th, and again today. We are in a deliberation phase of the hearing, meaning that both the record and public testimony are closed. Before we get started, does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
No. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain?
No.
No. Let's proceed to the staff report presentation.
All right, thank you, Chair Massey. This is going to be really brief, but at your deliberations at the January 28th meeting, we started with Section 2 of the Comprehensive Plan Policies. We were able to get through Sections 2, 3, 5, and 6 before the meeting was adjourned. And so in staff's discussions with Chair Massey, we had proposed that we start your deliberations this evening with Section 4, which is the Willamette Greenway section. Following that, move on to Sections 9 through 12 before coming back to Section 1, which is community engagement, Section 7, which is housing, and Section 8, which is urban design. We had proposed that order because we wanted to get through the items that had received less public comment so that we could focus the rest of your deliberations on Sections 1, 7, and 8 that received the most comments, besides maybe Section 3 that we've already gotten through. I would note before you move on to Section 4, if you decide to go in that order, we did make some, within Attachment 2 of your packet tonight is an updated track changes version of the draft policies. We have incorporated a couple of changes into Sections 3 and 6 based on some comments and direction that we had received, so I wanted to make sure the commissioners had an opportunity to look through there and make sure that there wasn't anything reflected in those proposed changes that they disagreed with. And if the commission is comfortable with the minor edits that have been made to Sections 3, 5, and 6, that we go ahead and move on and begin deliberations with Section 4.
Thank you, David. So before we get started, let me ask if there's any clarifying questions from the commissioners for the staff.
No, but...
Okay.
No.
So I think that I would follow the recommendation from the staff on just how we move through the sections to try to come to the completion of this comprehensive plan. But I do want to give the commissioners a chance one last chance. We gave some direction to the staff during the last meeting for some changes to those sections that we pinned down, and I just want to give you a last chance to see if there were anything that you felt like didn't get covered or didn't get covered in the way that you wanted it. So that would have been sections trying to find the right spot here. Bear with me. Sections 2, 3, 5, and 6. Was there anything that we didn't think get covered correctly from the staff edits?
Can we include 1 in that too, because we discussed that the night before as well?
We have not completed Section 1.
That's correct.
That's correct?
Correct.
All right.
Just to clarify, there was some discussion of some
discussion
items
about
within there,
yeah.
but we hadn't gone through
Yeah.
and actually
But we
deliberated.
haven't really kind of gone through. We'll
Got
have
it.
another chance.
Because we're going to talk about the,
Yeah.
right, got it. I have one thing for Section 2, and, oh, you know what? I do. Section 3. And that was, you know what? Never mind. I think my question was all in one point, all in one.
Anything else from the commissioners? Okay.
Chair Massey,
Yes.
I also just wanted to let you know, I'm here until 8 o'clock tonight, and part of the reason I'm here is for the Chapter 1 conversations that we've had over the last couple meetings. So I just wanted to make you aware that at 8 o'clock, I'm going to have to leave one way or the other.
Okay.
Thanks.
Remind us again, maybe 7:30, 7:40?
Happy to.
Okay.
Sounds great.
All right. Okay. Okay, if there are no other circle backs on 2, 3, 4, and 5, we will move on to section 4, I believe, which was the Greenway discussion.
There were primarily just some formatting
Yeah.
things that happened.
Yeah, and the staff worked on that, so any comments on section 4?
I just want to say thank you for staff for recognizing Peter Kerr Park as an actual park in the city. Thank you.
And it's actually Peter Kerr Park at Elk Rock Island National
Oh, is that
Area.
the technical name?
So you got to get the whole name correct. We researched the
deed?
Yeah.
And I also want to thank you for clearing up the idea between the comprehensive use and the community service use and the park master plans. It makes a lot more sense as it is written now.
Okay, thanks.
So I appreciate the language that's more declarative, but I did have a question on 4.2.2 when it said, consider preparing and adopting a Greenway design plan. I guess my question would be, why isn't it just prepare and adopt?
Because we think there's a way to do this without actually adopting a Greenway design plan. We have that the current, most of that text, I believe, is carryover from the current text, which called for a Greenway design plan. And assuming that our park master plans work as a component of a Greenway design plan, it was felt like, we could in fact do a Greenway design plan for the other areas outside of the park areas, and that would help with some of the review of private property. I think it's kind of optional, because today they would all go through the conditional use process. But if
So you would consider it if there was not another avenue to do this?
Yeah,
To
I
achieve the
think
same results?
it was just a question of, it's not absolutely mandatory,
Okay.
but it would help.
Other questions, comments on section 4? Okay. We will move on then. Let's go to
Nine, I believe.
is it 9?
Correct.
Yeah,
Section
9 through
9.
12, right?
I wanted to point one other thing out, and that was on your table in front of you tonight were some comments from Kim Travis, who couldn't be here tonight. So just as we get to those components that she commented on, we might want to reference those.
Okay.
And I also appreciate the fact that we changed renewable energy to carbon-free and clean energy. That's a good move.
Yeah, Natalie and Peter went through the whole document just to make sure that all the policies were in alignment with the emergency resolution as well as with the climate action plan. So everything should be consistent.
Okay. So is section 8?
No, we're on 9, I believe, right?
9, okay, you're right. Yep.
And so my first and we do this in other sections too, so I'll just say this once. At our over-searching section goal, all of a sudden we put in a participle that says to. All the other ones just use the verb. And so that happens in this document a couple of times. So however you want to make it consistent.
I think we'll be talking about the section goal language in a little bit, when we're done with that was part of my table of things, of comments, was about the section goal language. So I think we'll be revisiting all of that when we're done with policy, if that's okay.
Good. Parks and Recreation, any other comments on Section 9?
Policy 9.4.4.
Hold on, I'm getting that.
Oh. Talking to the mic.
What's that?
Talking to
Speak
the
into
mic.
the mic.
Oh, okay.
The city will work, I'm sorry, 9.4.4. I believe the revised is work with the parks, and it should be provider instead of districts, because you use provider in the earlier section and distinguish it away from district. And then policy 9.4.5. This again seems like that we have two separate ideas in the same sentence. So private industry will be encouraged to provide recreation opportunities and facilities for employees in employment areas. That should be one policy. Then another policy should be new commercial development is encouraged to provide parks and other recreational amenities for the general enjoyment of the public. It seems like those are two. I understand why they're put together, but they are two completely and totally separate entities, and they are separate people that you're supposed to be doing them for. So they should be both standalone policies. One is for employees. One is private industry for employees. The other one is new development for the general public.
Yeah, we're open to that if that's the consensus from.
Then we would just renumber that one sentence and then roll it down to the remaining sections. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just add a policy.
Okay.
And then I would like to add what would be considered 9.4.9 now. And just add a statement that says, use a community service use process to amend park master plans. Right, that is our intention.
Would you say that again?
Use a community service use process to amend park master plans.
Probably substantial, I don't know, amendments. There needs to be a qualifier there, because I think there could be minor amendments and major amendments, so it's like a major amendment. But let me think about that for a moment. That's the thought.
I'm just trying to capture in this document that we want to use, instead of going through a whole entire park master plan again for putting in a seesaw or, changing it from stone to a permeable area or permeable walkway, that you can use that community service use process. You mention it in the Willamette Greenway without really kind of explaining it. This seems like a place to explain it.
I think that's a perfectly fine idea. I just was wanting to make sure that that it's not every amendment, it's only like the major amendments, because there might be a simpler process to go through for minor amendments. But
So if you want to say create a simpler process by using a community service use to amend park master plans, or however you want to say it, I guess.
I think we can work with that.
It seems like a natural area to put it, and since it's referenced in the other section of the Willamette Greenway, without explanation, this gives it an explanation.
Okay.
Would it belong under Goal 9.2, Planning and Design, rather than under Development and Maintenance?
I think so.
Well, 9.4 is park development, I guess, however you want to do it.
Is it planning or is it development?
I guess it could be planning.
Commissioner Burns, do you have an opinion whether it is planning or development?
We're talking about the master plan, so the master plan results in the development of the park, so I don't feel strongly about it, but I'd slot it in 9.2. It's a good addition, Commissioner Heimer.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that.
Oh, that one got changed.
Okay.
My old copy.
Any objections to putting this into 9.2? Any
None.
other comments? Okay. So I think the consensus was to put that in section 9.2. Okay.
So that would be a new policy, 9.2.8.
Right. Other comments on section 9?
Well, okay, I guess one more thing, and I don't want to be nitpicky about, the words, but it's like in 9.1.1, we say Parks and Recreation provider, and we stripped out the language, North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District, and then in 9.1.2, it still just says North Clackamas School District. And so I'm just wondering if we want to be consistent with those, with our language or approach to the language in those policies, rather than specifically calling out a named entity to refer to school providers.
I think what policy 9.1.2 is saying, that we are going to support North Clackamas School District. Policy 9.1.1 is a general statement that we're going to work with a park and recreation provider no matter what, if NCSD goes away. But I think 9.1.2 is saying we strongly support NCSD.
Right, and I'm just saying that there might be opportunities with other providers to use, to provide recreational opportunities on school properties that aren't in CSD, like the Waldorf School or whatever. And so, maybe we just don't want to specifically name one entity in that policy. So school providers, school facilities providers.
I think that makes sense. So just say agreements with the city's park and recreational provider and work to provide recreational opportunities.
Well, I think the point is it may not be the cities. It could be a public or a private organization.
Well, we could just say with public and private organizations and institutions. Would that capture everything?
Maybe. I mean, it depends on how flexible you want to be there. I mean, I was thinking just replacing the specific school entity with a general reference to school operators or school facilities operators, rather than making it broader to just any kind of institution. It kind of changes the spirit of the policy, but I don't oppose where it goes when you broaden it that way necessarily.
Yeah, I think this is a recognition that this would be the major, provider outside of a park district, would it not?
I mean, the policy is trying to get schools to open up and be part of the community as a park. And so that's why I was thinking we could just say school facilities operators.
Agree.
And just for clarity, we could say, would it be okay to say private and public
Sure.
educational institutions?
We can do that, and
Okay.
I promise not to use quotation marks for school providers. I'm not quite sure I can't remember what the history of that is, but
I wouldn't be opposed to removing the quotation marks.
yeah,
in the other
the
one.
quotation marks in 9.1.1 will be removed. I'll have to look back through the various versions to
Okay.
see where that came from.
Anything else on 9?
No, thank you for entertaining my.
We're glad. We're glad to.
In thinking about Greg's comment earlier about the CSU process, I'm okay with CSU for all amendments, because within the CSU process, there's a major and a minor process to follow. But what about adopt? Yours was about make amendments to shouldn't we say adopt and make amendments? Use the CSU process to adopt and make amendments, because that's kind of what I was.
Tell me where that was again.
It was a new one, 9.2.8. It was, Greg had suggested, use the CSU process to amend park master plans. And I think it's adopt and amend park master plans.
That's fair. I agree with that.
Okay with that?
It's not going to be the same.
But, I know this is going to sound silly, but all park master plans are currently adopted, correct?
Yeah, but they could be revised and like thrown out, replaced. I mean, I'd say it's a new master plan.
So are you going to say if a new park comes online, something that hasn't been initiated yet, that would go through a community service use?
Yeah,
Okay. And
I see where you were going, but I was just kind of capturing it because there could be a brand-new plan for.
okay, so a brand-new plan would go through a community service use and not be adopted into the
Comp plan.
comp plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
For instance, we're redoing Scott Park entirely this next year. So the Scott Park Master Plan will be an entirely new document.
Well, let's take a piece of land that is not in the Parks District yet, and then it comes into the
Yeah.
Park District, then you have to create a master plan for it. But if we can just use a community service use for it and not put it into the comp plan, then that's fine as well.
That's the idea, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other comments on Section 9? Then we'll move to Section 10, which is Public Facilities and Services.
I know this, I'm sorry. So does that mean, oh, never mind, never mind. Now I know why I scratched that off. I have one that I would like to introduce as 10.5.9. And what I would like to say is encourage waste haulers to develop pickup of non-standard recyclable materials like styrofoam, car batteries, and electronics.
Go ahead.
This is a new policy.
This would be a new policy.
So this is programming that I believe we currently have a nonprofit in town that has been working on that same policy.
Yes.
I believe you've been working with them. I am a little concerned about that amount of detail going into the comp plan because I think that there are different materials and different priorities that may come over time depending on what we learn. Every couple of years, we learn something new about whether those become car batteries or something else in the future as infrastructure changes. If you would be open to it, I'd recommend that we look at something that's a little bit broader about the city looking at recycling hard-to-recycle materials or something a little bit different than that much detail on 3 items.
I would just be fine saying encourage waste haulers to develop pickup of non-standard recyclable materials
That's great.
without the list behind it.
That'd be great.
I'm on board with that.
Okay.
Can you read that one more time? Encourage waste haulers to pick up.
Yeah, to develop pickup, pickup's probably the really wrong word, but to develop pickup of non-standard recyclable materials.
Collection or
Yeah, collection of,
And you're just asking them to consider and to look into.
right, and then maybe, the next time the contract comes up, maybe the city can say, hey, once a year, have a styrofoam collection site. Something, what I really want to make sure is that it's a market that is deliverable to. Your electronics have a market that's Metro takes it for free, right? Car batteries have a place that they can go get recycled. Styrofoam has a place in town that can go get recycled. I don't want to make it so that it just gets thrown away. I want it to go to someplace that can actually use it and recycle it.
Yeah, and just so this is outside the scope of tonight, but we do our curbside annual pickup for the haulers. We do have this conversation annually, so that's part of why I don't have major concerns about expanding it, just to make sure that we're looking at hard-to-recycle items.
Or if our waste haulers want to go once a week and pick up the styrofoam that we constantly are filling this 8x7 box for every single week, that's costing us a lot of money, that would be helpful too.
Good to know. Thank you so much.
And it says add exceed enterprises for anybody that has styrofoam that wants to drop off.
I had a suggestion, same section, wondering whether we would add a policy for low emissions trucks for our waste haulers or clean fuel burning.
So I think my only caution on both of these are we just don't control them. So as long as everybody is aware that that would just be a conversation that we would have with them, I'm okay with it. But because of how waste is managed in this region, we don't have a whole lot of control over our haulers or over even what they pick up. A lot of that's dictated through Metro and through other agencies. So as long as we're okay with this being an encourage, I don't have a concern with it.
Okay.
Restate what you think the language should say.
Do we use the word encourage? Yes. Encourage and incentivize waste haulers to provide low emissions or clean fuel burning trucks,
Vehicles.
vehicles.
I think that can be put into a contract if you wanted it to be. I think that's fine. The word encourage would be good.
Yeah, so this wouldn't be a contract for us? I mean, that's the other piece.
I understand
Yeah.
that, but if you were to go look at the contract and you were to say,
The franchise agreement?
right, the franchise agreement, I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
and just say, hey, we like people that use clean burning vehicles. So that maybe you can choose your waste hauler on, one of those bases as well.
So I guess this is why I'm getting a little nervous. I don't choose. I don't actually get to have any decision over who ends up with which franchise agreements in order to provide service in the city. So this really is a very set relationship that's dictated largely by the region, not just by the city. What I can do, though, is I have no concerns having a conversation with all of our providers on an annual basis. So that's just for those watching on TV, that's the differentiation that I'm trying to make.
Okay.
Thank you.
I had a couple of comments, questions on 10.3. Continue to provide adequate wastewater collection and treatment services to all Milwaukee residents. Under 10.3.2, I'm not sure what is meant by appraisal. It says maintain and improve the existing sanitary sewer collection system through preventative maintenance and ongoing appraisal. Is that referring to the valuation of the sanitary sewer system?
Guessing that means assessment, not appraisal, but I can check in with our public works director and confirm.
I think we could probably just change it to assessment.
Yeah, I'm comfortable
Works.
with that. I think you're just trying to make sure that everything's in good order, good working order, and, not appraise it for its value.
Is it supposed to be assessment, or is it supposed to be, I just had the word in my head.
Evaluate?
Inspect.
Ongoing inspections.
We do both. So we inspect and we assess, so either of those terms would be fine.
I think assess would be more global, because an inspection could be part of an overall assessment.
Ongoing assessment, yeah, okay. 10.3.3, encourage alternative distributive systems. I think that might be distributed rather than distributive.
What was the number again?
10.3.3, the word distributive doesn't makes sense.
Systems can't distribute themselves.
Yeah, it's not,
So you're an expert in that. What is a distributive or distributed system?
I think I think the intent of the policy is to have kind of on-site treatment in an industrial property where possible so that their waste isn't going into the sewer. It's freeing up capacity through some kind of localized treatment option rather than centralized at the treatment plant is, I think, what is going on here, because we're talking about microsystems. So it's just simply replace the word distributive with distributed, and then it makes sense.
The only amendment that I would add to that is that it is also a consideration on large parcels where we would be doing a significant amount of residential, so it's not just industrial.
Okay. And then the last thing under 10.3 is, we had some conversation when we were on this topic earlier in the process, and I believe the current version of the comp plan calls to evaluate the removal of the sewage treatment plant, the water resource recovery facility, and that's gone now, and I kind of pained because I think the best thing for Milwaukee would be if we didn't have a treatment plant here and we could centralize it with the Tri-Cities plant. And so I'm kind of wishing that we had at least some directive in the policy to say if it becomes cost effective to do that, we should do that, and to just not to be silent on it, I think, is a disservice to our waterfront and our noses. So I would recommend a policy along the lines of participate in any opportunities to reduce or eliminate the need for the Kellogg treatment facility plant in lieu of other treatment opportunities.
Do you think there's an opportunity to squeeze it into 10.3.6? That's just one of the items to
What was the
consider.
number again?
10.3.6.
It would read, including examining the potential for generating energy, recovery of nutrients, possible acquisition of the plant, or elimination of the plant, removal of the plant in favor of treatment at in other cities.
Well, treatment at other facilities.
It could be in Milwaukee, just, it's...
I'd be fine with kind of expanding that list rather than adding a new policy, and then that's just one of the things that is encouraged to be considered.
I think it's, a significant enough change that I would prefer it as a separate policy, but if, just including it in 10.3.6 is better than remaining silent on it.
Well, and I think that makes sense, too. I mean, if they ever do the Tri-City hookup plant, right, I mean, then that gives Milwaukee a viable option to send their waste somewhere else, so.
Yeah.
John Henry, could I ask you, just for clarity, to give us one more shot at the language changes you're thinking?
I recognize we're not kind of, the discussion was had and we're not pushing for this, so I'm not looking to include strong language saying invest city resources in making the treatment plant go away, but rather evaluate opportunities and participate in planning activities to eliminate the need for the treatment plant in the city of Milwaukee in favor of treatment in alternate.
Are you asking to put in a new policy?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, just a new policy saying if we can invest in the Tri-Cities plant and a larger connector to that and capacity of that plant and get rid of Kellogg, the Tri-Cities plant is in kind of a better location. It's less of an eyesore. It's just a better facility all around.
And so I agree with Commissioner Edge in throwing it into 10.3.6. and just say participate in developing long-term plans for the treatment plant, including examining the potential for generating energy from the plant and system operations, recovery of nutrients and other resources, the possible acquisition of the plant by the city, and removal of the water treatment facility.
Possible, okay.
Whatever it is.
Possible removal of the
Possible
treatment
removal of the
facility.
treatment facility.
Just so you know, the reason I think we're being quiet isn't because we agree or disagree. This was obviously a hearty conversation for individuals who are in the CPAC. I wasn't in those meetings. I'm not comfortable saying why it was removed, but we're happy to add it in and have that discussion with council.
David or Denny, can you guys shed any light on that?
No, it was just that it feels like the plant is here to stay with reinvestment in the plant and so on. So it was, I mean, I agree with you. It's not an ideal situation, but it was the previous language in the plan was all about removing it and making it hard for them to do anything.
Yeah.
And so, we made a major change in the plan by eliminating that language. I don't think there's any harm in making a statement about, if the opportunity arises, go for it. So I think that's reasonable.
You have enough to work with, David?
Yeah, if the consensus is to add it to 10.3.6, we'll do that and bring it back on the 25th in an updated track changes version.
I mean, Commissioner Burns, do you want to make it its own policy?
Straw poll, yes, separate policy. But I've heard two to keep it the same. So.
Let me see just a show of hands of who wants a separate policy and who's okay with just having it roll into 10.3.6. First, separate policy.
Well, if Commissioner Burns is adamant about it, it doesn't really matter to me either way.
I'll make one more case for it. Knowing that it was the entire focus in the current comp plan was to get rid of the dang thing, it's still a good idea to get rid of it. I understand it's probably not going to happen and that we should make wise investments in the reality of the current situation. I'm not trying to reduce the level of investment or the strength of the policies around the likelihood that we'll maintain the plan. But as a hat tip to the current plan and the fact that it, had a lot of thought and a lot of good reasons into why that plant would be better located elsewhere. Let's give it at least one policy that says this would be in the interest of the city to reclaim that land for something else.
Are there any strong objections to having a separate policy?
I have no strong objections. My only counterpoint is that the policy that's in place is about planning for the future of the site, and decommissioning, a potential decommissioning and removal is consistent with planning for the future of the site. And so it's just whether or not you feel like the policy is specifically about the plant or the policy is specifically about the site. And if it's about the plant, then we could have a new policy for the site. If the existing policy is about the site, then we just add it to the list of, possible planning futures for the site. So that would be my, my distinction right there is this existing policy, which says it's about the plant, only about the plant, or are we inferring that it's really about the site?
Yeah, I mean, the goal is not about the plan. The goal is about the service that's being provided to the residents, and that service could be provided with a plant at a different location, and that is distinct from the existing Kellogg plant.
Yeah.
So here's my suggestion. Why don't we make it a new policy? If City Council or if the citizens have a strong objection at the next phase of this, if our planning director and city manager and assistant or senior planner could explain to City Council how we feel about this, and that it could be added into the other policy, then I think that would be wonderful. But I think getting a little bit of verbiage in there is a great idea.
Mm-hmm. I think everyone agrees it belongs in here somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
New policy.
Yeah.
New policy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
New policy about the site, yes.
Oh, and one last thing, since I'm just thinking about sewers here. 10.3.4, the second sentence, encourage capacity expansion through water conservation. I think that would be reduce the need for capacity expansion through water conservation and the use of pretreatment. I don't think
Which
water,
which policy was this?
10.3.4, the second sentence.
Oh, gotcha.
Water conservation doesn't encourage capacity expansion. It preserves capacity for other uses, or it reduces the need for a capacity expansion.
Yeah, reduced need for, yeah.
It conserves the capacity.
All right. Got that.
So,
Any other comments on 10?
yeah, so 10.6.1. Support efforts to implement crime prevention through environmental design, SEPTED principles in building and site design and transportation corridors. I'd like to change transportation corridors to in the public realm. Because you could have public space that is not for transportation that still deserves to be designed with crime prevention techniques in mind.
Can you give me that reference one more time?
10.6.1, replace and transportation corridors at the tail end with and in the public realm.
Deserve its own policy and should we participate in all these discussions about it. Does that make sense? Do you want me to say something about it?
Might want to.
So can I bring us back for a second to the discussion of the separate policy regarding the Kellogg plant? I just note that in policy 10.3.4, we have a different policy that's completely the opposite, which is to encourage the optimization and improvement of the existing facility. So it seems to me that having another policy that is contrary to another policy. That being said, I think the city can have a policy that includes participating in any discussions, because it is obviously part of a regional system that Wes is typically or is in charge of. And so participating in those discussions, I think, takes or gets rid of the contrary nature of having its own separate policy. And then we end up not having it, but it's just my thoughts. We can do it either way, and we can note it, as Commissioner Hemer has said, when we get up to the next level. But I note that inconsistency could be problematic.
I think that's a really good point. And thank you for calling out how that interplays with 10.3.4. We do have that challenge where there's an explicit policy about encouraging the continued use of that facility. So it may be appropriate to bundle it into, maybe more appropriate to bundle it into the participate in developing long-term plans policy. That's, we don't need to rehash it all, but that's, I see the reason for doing that.
Commissioner Burns, you were the strong proponent of the separate, so your thoughts?
I'll roll over on that one.
Okay.
Sorry.
But we will make sure that we pass along the vocal concern from all of you about that specifically.
Okay.
But we are going to include it in 10.3.6.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's important not to lose sight of that as a possible future.
So was Commissioner's Edge comments on 10.6.1 understood?
Correct. Change transportation corridors to the public realm.
Anything else on section 10?
I have one, I know this is ridiculous, but 10.7.4, we say support creation of master plans for institutional uses such as parks, schools, and hospitals, but it doesn't sound like that we're going to create master plans for parks anymore, right?
No, there will be master plans. They're just adopted through the community service use process.
All right, that's good enough. I know I'm confusing. Thank you.
Any other comments on Section 10?
No.
Rather than jumping to Section 11, I'm going to go on to Section 1, if we could now.
Oh, all right, good.
Which is community engagement, and we wanted to make sure that we had the insight from the city manager before she has to leave. So this was an important topic.
Excuse me.
And I hope you had a chance to read Commissioner Travis's comments, which touch on this issue. Did everybody get a chance to read that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll open it up for discussion here on Section 1. Is there anything you'd like to proceed with? No?
No, I'm really here to answer questions and
Okay.
to provide you any insight based on those same questions.
Okay.
So I thought at the last meeting, if we're talking about policy 1.3.1, that we had decided that we're going to, that this was okay, that city council will appoint and maintain a community involvement advisory committee. And I would like to add that meets or exceeds the requirements of statewide planning goal 1. And then that way, if city council decides that, hey, we need a communications team of citizens, that they can go beyond the scope of state planning 1. But yeah, I mean, they should. I think it's a relative decent solution to let city council choose.
I would say that I feel that council can do that without the amendment, but I respect if you want to add the amendment.
I think it's generally consistent with us trying to highlight how, we're, really stepping up to be more inclusive and more engaged and more. So, and exceed would, kind of be in the spirit of that, as opposed to just meeting. I realize it's kind of a semantic thing and, it doesn't really have an effect on the policy, but it does.
Right. What I would hate for is that maybe not this city council, but the next city council says, hey, look, all we need is a involvement advisory committee that is for state planning goal 1, and that's it. And so then all you're doing is talking about how to communicate land use and not how to communicate events or how to involve different types of people or how to reach out to volunteers. I mean, this community, involvement advisory committee could be a lot.
I have no concerns with the amended language. It was only a comment of whether or not you needed it. But if it helps make the point known, I think it's great.
You want meets or exceeds or meets and exceeds?
Or exceeds.
I think that's appropriate. I think that's totally fine.
All right, we have that.
And I'm fine with kicking it down the can and letting city council make the decision.
They get to anyway.
The only other comment I would make is that if we are going to leave it to state planning goal 1, right, if that's the way that this commission feels that we need to go, I would say that we include NDA leaders or land use chairs on our Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee. Because when they came here, thanks to what was then ex-chair Travis, that is the discussion that we had. And good things came out of it. Denny's staff created a portal to be able to let people access pre-development stuff, which is one of the things that, we still have issues with land use stuff coming out and comments due before the next meeting. And because of the 120-day clock, it gets complicated. But we can hash these things out. But we need, the confusion from the NDAs and what their problems are.
And I think at the last meeting, we went to this language in order to give that option to make that option available to the council. They can do that if they choose to.
Well, and I think the other piece is that, let's say that council appoints all of you as the board. It does not preclude you from including the group of NDA leadership into that discussion. It would preclude them as a voting member unless the council actually set that as the full body. Does that make sense? So if you have an opinion on that when we go down this path in a few months, and you really want them to appoint it versus not for the NDA leadership, just let's have that conversation at that time. And
Well, and I think it could be much, I mean, a random group of citizens could all tell you how they receive their communication and what they pay attention to. I mean, let's be honest with the conversation that we've been having. I look at the city website every single day, okay? So I know all this stuff that's going on. My neighbors don't care what is going on in the city. They walk up to me when there's a
You are
flag
our city
somewhere,
website.
and they say, what's going on? And so, I mean, you know, and so people feel, and I call it the Johnny-come-late syndrome, but it's, I give Mr. Orlento a huge amount of props. He brought in a large group of people to discuss the issues that they had that they didn't have had a chance yet to reflect. And, you know, there's some sort of, you know, medium range that, you know, can be found to be able to communicate with everybody in the city.
Well, and I think my only ask is I've checked in, we're getting the audit back on the community engagement audit. I believe next month we'll get our first version. We'll actually finalize that in April or May. We'll provide that to all of you so that you have a chance to see sort of where there are things slipping or where it's going really well. And I think that would be a really useful tool before we make the decision on all those pieces anyway, just to make sure that we're hitting the right shortcomings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there needs to be a plan developed before we just say,
Yeah.
okay, the planning commission is in charge of this.
Yep.
I really think that is the proper way to go, and that's why we should kick the can down to, I'm sorry to use that word, but kick the can down to city council and let it get flushed out a little bit.
The spirit of this policy is how is the city going to address the requirements of land use goal 1. And so it's the directive as the policy is that we are deferring to city council to make that decision. That's what the current language reads. And so it's really about how are we going to, you know, this is a statement to DLCD, how are we going to meet your requirement for goal 1? And it's that we're going to have city council design that.
And I don't think at this point in time, this commission or city staff or the planning department is willing to commit to a specific way to address this.
Yeah, I think we have that flexibility. We're building that flexibility in here in case it ever changes in the future. I assume that will be okay with DLCD.
Well, I think that the one thing that came out of the discussions here is that, you know, that although we were trying to scratch this itch of statewide planning goal 1, we think that the itch is all over the body, and that there's a need for, you know, citizen involvement in a lot of areas beyond land use.
Yeah.
And so I don't like the term kick the can, because I think that what we're doing is allowing the city council to make a more holistic decision on this issue, rather than just saying, yep, we got land use, let's move on.
I like holistic issue myself as well.
Yeah, much better than kick the can, yeah. All right.
And then my only question is in policy 1.3.4, prioritize funding in the planning budget. Should that be city budget to support inclusive community engagement and participation?
So part of the confusion that I've been struggling a little bit with over the last probably month and a half is just helping and trying to focus on what this document is and isn't. The document is a land use and transportation planning document, and so that's why we're trying to contain it to those pieces. It's not that all of these other things aren't critical to council. It's that those are higher larger arching goals for the city beyond this process. It does not change the fact that all of you care about that process or care about those larger arching goals. So we care about them. We're working on them. The question is really, do they fit here? So from that perspective, the responsibility of this document is to make sure that the planning budget actually continues to fund the kind of community engagement that's required under one, and that's why it's outlined that way. In terms of community engagement this year, there's actually a substantial amount of money in the budget, both this past year and these future years, because of programs like SAFE, the comp plan, the new library, where we invested a lot of money actually into community engagement. But those don't matter if we don't get the land use community engagement right for this body. So yes, I think for my recommendation is that you focus it for the planning budget in this specific location.
Okay, and I kind of see it both ways. I was kind of thinking, oh, well, this is just to set up the planning department to be able to
Get the budget they
have
need.
funds.
And in the current budget, we've got money allocated for public involvement as part of our future comp plan implementation work. You know, it's there.
Any other comments on section 1?
I was looking at 1.3.3, evaluate the success of community involvement activities regularly and make results available to the community. Do we want to stipulate what regularly is, or are we intentionally vague?
I think that's probably a good point. I mean, you could say annually, that would be good.
I was going to
No
think,
less than annual.
yeah,
At a minimum.
curious how we feel about annual. Is it
Well, I guess-
biannual or?
My question is the how we do this, right? So you can perfunctory meet it, or you can actually nail it. And I think that the goal right now is that whoever the committee is who's going to be doing the engagement would regularly get updates. Until we know what that committee is and how often they're talking about this, it's really hard for us to know how often you need the updates. So that's my caution about changing the verbiage too much, is it should align with the committee and the committee's goals.
Well, and the reason why I like regularly is because what happens is if you have a town hall that only brings in 25 people, you're going to have at your follow-up meeting, you are going to decompress, how come we only had 25 people there? And how do we get more people there? And so they're going to come to the planning and said, we only had 25 people, that we wanted more people, or we only had 10 people do the survey all the way through. What's the problem with the survey?
You feel like it limits you, potentially limits you to once a year when you?
But regularly means that, you decompress after each kind of thing that you do that you involve the public. We hear reports all the time. David tells us how many people participated in the poll and gives a whole breakdown of that. I mean, they break it down all the time. I think it happens
It happens a lot.
naturally. And so regularly, I think, is fine. I mean, unless if you wanted an audited report once a year that shows all that.
I really think that once you've got a CIAC in place functioning, that's
They'll
what they
define
do. That's kind of their responsibility, is to do that and make sure that happens on a regular basis, whatever that might be.
Can I just give a little bit of credit, actually, to the two gentlemen sitting up here for a minute, too? I mean, the comp plan, when you look at how much engagement and how often they've talked about the level of engagement, the number of public comments, exact verbatim responses on what the comments were, I think that this team has done an exceptional job of showing that. My hope is actually that we'll end up more often, not less, because that's the precedent, because that's what we do. Whenever we come forward with an ordinance, we will talk to you about what the engagement was around that ordinance amendment and all the pieces that went into that.
I certainly appreciate not wanting to, let regularly be every 3 years.
Yeah.
But, that's what we're just trying to balance out here, I think, is, and so if something was no less than annually,
That's great.
that's at least, I think that's at a minimum acceptable level. And I don't even know that that's acceptable, but at least we're not putting the clamps on.
Well, then the next question is what's included in the report,
Yeah.
right? So are we talking about this on a per application basis? Are we talking about this uniformly just for applications?
I don't know if this document stipulates that level of detail, but
Yeah.
at least we could say annually, right?
Yeah, you can say annually, but I think that, is that a formal report that's annually? And does that change how you want to receive the other updates? I don't think it does. So is it a consolidation of all activities undertaken over the course of the year? Is it, I'm just struggling because we haven't created the report yet. And we haven't created the committee that's receiving the report yet. So I'm not actually trying to make it difficult. I think that more is better, actually, on this. And I think in your bylaws, or in whoever committee's bylaws, create some sort of document that says, we expect this. This doesn't preclude you from becoming more exact at that point.
Yeah, and I don't know that we need to change the spirit of the policy, but, certainly adding in a safety net, it feels comfortable to me, and so no less than annually. But I don't know if that, if you really need the extra detail going in to what is, prepared annually or no less than annually. I mean, I think that it's fine to be a little bit, we want to be general with the policies. This is a general level type, document, but.
I'll go with no less than annually, and my expectation by saying that is that we get the same reports that we currently get, which is every time that there is a major community outreach effort, there is numbers and datas of people that responded or people that show up.
No one up here has concerns with that language. So if you want to make it no less than annually, we're great.
You could just add that at the end of the sentence.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Is that okay, Commissioner Roosevelt?
I'm good.
I'm okay with that. Any other items, section 1?
Well, we had a lot of commentary around the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and a lot of great public testimony on that subject. It's, I don't want to neglect to deliberate on that. I've been thinking about that one a lot and kind of torn on how to proceed given the importance of equity and inclusion and diversity. In the end, I agree with Commissioner Travis's recommendation, comments that she put in writing that we can promote DEI in the implementation of the comp plan, and that we're kind of strategically avoiding introducing new committees through policy. So that's how I would recommend responding to the public testimony on that matter.
And so I've been thinking a lot about this too. We're talking about DEI now. And I want to give, and I'm going to probably pronounce her name wrong, but Ms. DeMorrow, and Mr. Lashbrook, and Mr. Rousseau, and everybody else that was involved with the idea. The problem is that these are concepts. They're not ideas. And so, and the reason why I asked so many questions is because I wanted to know if they have a concept. Well, they don't know what it is. They couldn't even give us what section it should go into the comp plan. So all it is an idea. And what I would suggest is that this group gets together and actually form a concept of it and take it in front of City Council and give a little bit more direction of what it should do, and be unified on that front, and take it from the idea stage to a conceptual stage. And so I would say that we do not include it in this document, but we should certainly encourage the people that believe that it should be in this document to take it up to City Council, but bring it up a little bit more of a grade of thought.
I also have been thinking about this quite a bit, and I was Ms. DeMoro's testimony did leave, an impression with me. And, I really appreciate, the amount of detail that she went into, to express the concepts and ideas that she had. The challenge that we have is that this is a land use document, and the idea of integrating DEI strategies into the city's practices is far broader than just land use. And so while I really want to see a dedicated committee for this purpose, it is not within the scope, the narrow scope of land use to define that committee. It is, however, within the scope of land use to define how the city's land use policies will be impacted by DEI concepts. And so, and we have that. There was an attachment to the previous packet that, listed all of the policies that touch on DEI concepts. And this is a very, again, I want to be, I want the committee, I want the DEI committee, I want to be an activist about that and, see that result, see that happen. But in this document doesn't do enough for that to make that body be what it should be. And so, it's a larger, it's a much broader concept or collection of concepts than simply, how does DEI impact land use? And so I think staff has done an admirable job, and the CPAC did an admirable job integrating DEI concepts into the comp plan policies where they belong based on the subject matter of the policy, and that a dedicated committee, while certainly appropriate, and I really hope it happens, this is not the place to define that. It is just a place to define the interplay between DEI concepts and the city's land use responsibilities. So that's how I feel about it. I would love to see DEI committee, but this is not the right document to do that, in my opinion.
I tend to agree, and I think that the concept, the idea of a separate committee would be stronger if it were not included in this comp plan. That to do it full justice, it should be, and I agree, it should, I would encourage the group to provide some kind of a proposal to City Council so that we could really do it justice and not limit it just to the comp plan and land use issues.
Yeah, I think that there is sort of a, general agreement that we all like the idea. We think it's a bigger issue that needs to be advocated for. But at the same time, I do want to make sure that when the recommendation goes forward to the City Council, we highlight that section that was given to us last time in Attachment 4, because, they were all encouragement and consider and that kind of thing, but they were, considered by the CPAC in their recommendations, and they were addressed. And I think that kind of gets lost if we just give them, the write-up, because then you have to figure out where it all is. And so in some form, I think we take that previous Attachment 4 and highlight that to the City Council whenever the recommendation goes forward.
Yeah. And we can do that as part of the staff report.
Yep.
Yeah.
Gosh, are we, have anything else on Section 1?
You can go home early.
I would just note on, in the January 28th staff report, we had called out some options. The staff report predated when Mary had prepared all the list of policies that touched on DEI. We had provided an option for a policy 1.2.5, which was more generic as far as considering diversity, equity, inclusion in essentially major land use decisions, comprehensive plan, map, and text amendments. That was in Attachment 3 of the January 28th packet. I'm looking at Attachment 2 of the February 11th packet, tonight's packet, and it somehow didn't get in there. So I just wanted to see if commissioners felt there was any need to include more references to diversity, equity, inclusion in the policy language, or if they felt content with kind of the assessment that staff had done on the level of discussion that's already within the policies. Do commissioners feel the need to expand any policy language within this section related to DEI issues?
I liked that idea of having, you know, that extra policy to consider DEI issues with respect to, you know, land use decisions of some scale. You know, I don't know what the threshold is necessarily, whether we just, you know, any zone change or comp plan amendment or whatever, or
I
if
think that was the threshold. It was where you have to invoke those criteria. That was, I think, what we listed in that policy. Did we list conditional uses and?
No, we didn't. I can
Yeah.
read it for you. So it was consider diversity, equity, and inclusion when making land use decision related to map or text amendments to the comprehensive plan in any code or maps implementing the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, and what policy number was that?
That was new policy 1.2.5 and attachment 3 of the January 28th packet. I'm not quite sure how it didn't make it into this one.
So,
Right, that's right, I do remember, yeah, because I was,
Yeah, so it
Anyway,
would
it's-
basically result in us amending the code to add some criteria for those amendments.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. Right.
Okay. Everybody okay?
Everyone good with that?
Yes.
Could you read that one more time? I'm sorry, I don't have the paperwork in front of me.
So it's consider diversity, equity, and inclusion when making land use decisions related to map or text amendments to the comprehensive plan and any codes or maps implementing the comprehensive plan. So that would be essentially the zoning code and zoning map.
So this isn't a new subdivision, but it is a zone change before building a new subdivision, perhaps.
So is diversity, equity, and inclusion self-explanatory?
No.
May I ask that those three words then be in the glossary?
Yeah, they should be.
Are they
Based on
already?
how many conversations I've had with people defining them, it would be really helpful to be very clear about that.
Yeah, and there's on page 42 of the policy document, which goes back to the January 14th meeting packet, we have a call-out box that defines DEI. And so, but we can make sure that it's in the glossary as well. All three are in the glossary, Mary's pointing out.
Okay, thank you.
And then I think we'd carry that over into the zoning ordinances definition because if the policies get taken forward, we need to take that forward too.
Yeah.
And this is a little perfunctory, but we also have a consultant on board right now who's doing some work with the city on DEI issues. I'd like them to review the language before we take it to council, just to make sure that the terminology is best practice today before we put it into code.
Sure.
Thanks.
Other comments on section 1?
My only other statement is 1.12 that says ensure publications and printed materials. Do we want to include the internet or the web base or
Digital,
digital?
yes.
Unless if publications covers that as well.
What policy was that?
1.12. The world has changed since 1980, I think, where this was drawn from, and I think we should add in digital marketing
just
or
add-
whatever you want to call it.
Ensure publications, yeah, we'll just add digital in there somehow.
And printed and digital materials.
Yeah.
Other comments on section 1?
Everything else screwed up here.
I need a restroom break, is that okay?
Sure. I'd like to take a short adjournment, if that's okay. Do I need to close the meeting? Nope. Okay, let's take until 8 o'clock. How about that? would like to continue the meeting with Section 11, Economic Development. Looks like the only thing that was updated was the clean and carbon-free energy
Yeah, and I,
statement.
yeah, and I put on all my notes, good as amended as I saw that.
Okay. Does anyone have comments for Section 11?
No.
No.
Okay. That one was easy. Okay, we'll go on to Section 12, Urban Growth Management.
The last one. No comments on section 11, so we're on section 12.
Excuse me. Any comments on Section 12? There were a number of changes.
Just wishing we could change the acronym UGMA.
Do you have a suggestion? Not sure it'll,
Can't get around that one.
Couldn't
Yeah, I know.
be any more creative, huh?
yeah, UGMA, yeah. UGMA.
I feel like it's an accurate acronym when you're hammering these things out.
Yeah.
I have no changes.
Anyone else?
Nope. I've written okay by 12.52, 12.53, 12.54, which must have been changes from the January, because I was working off my old list.
Yeah.
So those changes I must have liked. I don't have it sitting here on my tablet. I'm looking at the matrix column.
Sure. So do you think that we can move to Section 7, Housing? Okay.
All right, here we go.
Yep, this one's going to be a good one.
So right off the bat, to get rid of that too, and for the oversection goal, it should read, provide opportunities for development of housing for a variety, not of a variety. Right? Am I reading that correctly? Or am I misinterpreting what that of and the for should be for?
4.
4 sounds better.
Okay.
Totally wasn't ready for section 7 here.
Well,
We paid consultants to write this.
Actually, grammatically, for, what is the variety of types what's the types? For modifies, or types, development of housing, they're developing a variety of types of housing.
Yeah.
For a variety of types, I'm not saying it can't be rewritten, but I don't think for is correct, it conveys.
Right. That's why I wanted to make
sentence
sure.
is trying to convey.
If it changes the meaning,
How about would it make sense to say a variety of housing types? For development of a variety of housing types?
For development.
That would make, I think that does it.
That's simpler.
Development of a variety
Of housing types.
of types of housing, or there's a lot of ofs.
No, for development of a variety of housing types at a range of price levels.
Did the Section 7 edits that I proposed before the last meeting, like the day of the last meeting, get printed anywhere in our packets?
Last week, or last meeting they did.
I thought they did.
This meeting, I haven't seen them.
Yes.
Last meeting they came through.
If not, you'd probably go print them. I mean, I have a copy right. in front
I
of
have
me.
a, yeah, I have a copy.
Here, Joseph, somewhere.
What page numbers?
In the old packet, it's 86. I don't know what it is in the new packet.
Do we need to go make copies for everybody, or do you guys have them?
It was a,
I think I've got mine with me.
yeah, it was a,
January 28th?
the January 28th email, 12:27 PM.
Hold on. I know I have it because I saw it earlier.
Variety of housing types at a range
Oh, I got
of
it right
price
here.
levels, so you remove that.
You got it?
Is it, what attachment number was it?
I think it was a handout.
I believe it was a handout, and let me see if it then,
Is it dated the 14th of January?
January 28th.
January 28th.
It looks like this. No.
Well, now I can't find it.
I think I need a copy, please. Or I could share if.
We can look here.
willing to-
Yeah, I'm sure. We'll just put it right here. No need for another copy. Okay, all right.
No, it should be actually attachment 4 in this packet. It should be at the,
Attachment 4 in this week's packet?
maybe somehow, yeah, it's listed as attachment 4, January 28th and February 3rd, Commissioner Edge comments, but then I don't see anything
Oh, I know
after,
you're going to hate me for this.
I don't see anything after the matrix.
Sounds like you. Here you go.
No, I got it, I found it.
Okay.
I've got
I got my
the
copy.
packet from last week right here, so
Okay.
it's just a matter of digging through it.
Oh, is it right there?
No, that's Kim's.
Okay, did you have a point that you were trying to make?
Did we decide? Did we decide on the?
Pause,
Did we,
Pages
Just a
of
rhetorical
points.
question.
you,
did we decide on the 4 of issue to make that
Yeah,
a little bit clear?
I think we did.
Okay.
Did it get rolled into the, is it just in the matrix? There's a,
No, the matrix is attachment 3, and there should have been an
no, there's an
attachment.
attachment 4 that is comments from Commissioner Edge in a matrix format.
Those are about the section headings.
those are
And,
additional comments.
yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was supposed to be a section, an attachment 4 that included 2 emails from Commissioner Edge, and so I'm not quite sure how that didn't get appended to the end of the packet.
Well, look,
Yeah, they were in the handouts last time, so.
it says attachment 4. At the bottom, it says, these are the February 3rd.
Okay, yeah, maybe,
We didn't get,
There it is.
we have the February 3rd comments. We don't have the January 28th comments.
Okay, so the reason for bringing this up, and ultimately, you kind of have to go a little deep because I'm verbose. But when you get a few pages in, then you see that I have basically printed out all of the section goals and policies for housing. And what I did is I printed out what the draft language was at the time on January 28th, which, admittedly might be a little different now, but we didn't really talk about housing on January 28th, so
Yeah.
it should be pretty stable.
Yeah,
Specifically, I started off rewriting the section goal to reflect more of the vision language and to be more aspirational as a goal with a 20-year planning horizon. And so I have, that's what it starts with. It starts with the language of the overarching section goal, and then in italics afterwards, my counter proposal, if you will. And so the idea is that I went through here, and I don't know that we need to rewrite every policy, but the point of the exercise was to show policies that had clear direction, clear, easy to interpret direction for the CPIC. So whoever comes later that's going to be taking this and implementing it, to have, to know what they're being, guided to do, as opposed to it kind of being this ambiguous, oh, do we want to, how are we actually achieving this? But to state the policies is actually something that can be achieved. Go do this thing. And so that's I kind of rewrote the same concept. The spirit of all of the policies is untouched, in my opinion. I don't think I've edited away any of the meaning, but the language is more to the point. It's more direct, and it's more policy language as opposed to, some of the additional, it's less verbose, let me put it that way, because the policies can be. The goals are a little bit more verbose, and that's where we describe why we're trying to do something. The policies describe the how, or instruct the how. And so that's why I went through and did this particular exercise. And what it revealed to me mostly is that it's kind of the role that each of these sections are, of the policies are playing. And so I want to talk about that a little bit later when we talk about section headings. And that's what the matrix is that they were talking about, that's at the very end of this packet, is where we'll talk about the section heading stuff later. But just looking over the policies, kind of the restated policies of section 7 as I put them in the email, I'd just like to kind of, as we go through the policies, just kind of look at those along with the current policy language and see if we feel one way or another about how the language could be written without changing the spirit of the policy. So
Looks as though, go ahead.
Go ahead.
It looks as though you touch almost each one. So we just
yep,
go right down the list?
I hit every single one.
So, and
Well, before we do that, let me ask the staff, were any of these suggestions considered? Were these suggestions
It's too
considered?
late.
We had not incorporated these into any of the edits to attachment 2. In this staff report, we had indicated that we wanted to have that discussion with the commission.
Okay. All right.
So may I ask this question, and I wish that Commissioner Travis was here this evening. So I'm going to rely on the two of you that were in the room during this discussion during the CPAC. How deliberate and how much discussion went into these points that were written?
Into the policy language as currently proposed?
Yes.
Or into?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say the most time went into the housing policies just because we did have a separate concurrent track. We had 5 CPAC meetings where we essentially were talking just about housing. We had work sessions with Planning Commission and City Council, so I would say that there probably was the most time spent on the housing policies.
so rewriting them, I think,
Is
if
a
I
big deal.
understand where you're going with this, if we consider each one, and Commissioner Edge had said the spirit is retained.
That was the most important thing to me, was to not change the meaning of what language has come through, and but to make it more legible and more of a direction. So, I mean, that's kind of the point, I think, is that we've gone through this process. We know what we're trying to do. We know what policies we're trying to implement, and now we're at, and this is kind of what I had envisioned the synthesis stage being, but the synthesis kind of got all kind of bundled up into, you know what I mean? It's like we didn't really do this pure synthesis stage where, you know, there was an additional block where you guys came back to us with everything. You know, we're doing that now, and so now I'm bringing it up. You know, you take everything that came before, and without changing the meaning of it, you put it into policy language, and you do the dirty work of putting it into boring, legible, repetitive, easy to interpret directions. And with a lot of structure and consistency. And so that's what I had envisioned the synthesis stage being. And so the boring, repetitive, but legible nature of the revised edits that, as I've proposed them for Section 7, kind of speak to that, which is, you know, well, we would have probably gone through this process where we did things in this really consistent, easy for someone, you know, someone's going to come take this later and look at it and try to act on it. And so the things that they're acting on should be clearly described, you know, and easy to interpret. And so that's kind of why I chose to reorganize the words and trim the fat a little bit from the policies.
Let's just get at it. I mean, start with 7.1 and
I just want to say how much I
Disagreement?
respect what happened, what came before,
Right,
you
right.
know, and I'm not trying to take anything away from what came before, but now we're putting it into implementation type of language, and so that's why I went through this exercise. Thank you for bearing with my.
Yeah, I think we just start to plow through it. So you want to start?
So with the section goal, I took what was there to provide opportunities for development of housing of a variety of types and at a range of price levels that enhances the community's livability and meets the needs of a full spectrum of Milwaukee residents in an environmentally sustainable and equitable manner. I rephrased that to be to achieve housing security for Milwaukee residents of every socioeconomic status and physical ability within dwellings and neighborhoods that are entirely equitable, delightfully livable, and completely sustainable. And those words are directly from the vision statement.
all of them?
I mean, basically, yes, but the conclusion, you know, the entirely equitable, delightfully livable, and completely sustainable is verbatim.
Okay.
I have a marked up vision statement if you want to refer to it. So it, you know, this reaches for the stars, as opposed to saying.
Sure. I would say that I think it's a reasonable change to make. Do we need to go vote on each one of these, or?
I mean, if I've changed, I mean, I think the section goals need their own discussion, and I don't know that, you know, right now maybe we don't dive into the section goal language for this right now because we're reviewing the policies, and so maybe we just move through the policies and see what we feel about the language as we go through. But, you know, this is.
So there is a pattern to the changes that you're making, and so we may not need to
Correct.
eye on every one. I think rather if we agree with the general approach that Commissioner Edge is taking to make this more directive and more consistent, we could have a conversation. Do we want to follow him down this road he's leading us down? If we do, as we walk through these one by one, and we start to see the pattern, we could just have an opportunity to dissent or request a change, but a bias towards accepting this direction.
As much as I trust Commissioner Edge, I think that this warrants a discussion of each one, and it can be a brief discussion. It's like, read the next one, any heartburn, so to speak, and then keep moving. Because think he's put a lot of thought into this and everything like that, but I think that we need to look at each one of these and just see if there's any concerns about it. I mean, I guess my biggest concern is the CPAC spent a lot of time on this. That's my biggest concern.
Right.
So I'm a little bit, reluctant to just say, okay, well.
So let's get into the policies.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're working through right now. And so just starting at 7.1.1, provide the opportunity for a wider range of rental ownership housing choices in Milwaukee, including additional middle housing types in low and medium density zones. Changing that language to read, through the zoning ordinance, permit a variety of detached and attached housing typologies in lands designated for large lot size and medium lot size residential. It's just a little bit more direct
All right,
about
so-
how we're doing this.
So first off, we need to start off with the verb, so it needs to be permit. Permit needs to be the beginning of the statement, and then through the zoning.
We have done these, I mean, it's still the action, it's still an action statement, though we have used clauses in front of them in different policies. But
We're just saying that the instrument for this is the zoning ordinance. Permit is the verb.
Right, well, why can't you just say permit a variety of detached and attached housing typologies in lands designated for large lot size and medium lot size residential through the zoning ordinance?
You can. The point is that the first part is using this instrument, do this thing that accomplishes these.
Commissioner Hemner, you're going to recognize that it happens in all of the following edits similarly.
we probably don't need to say through the zoning ordinance. I think it's implicit, it's implied by the fact that we're talking about what's permitted.
And that's totally fine, and that's something that, that's,
See, so
I was presenting I was following a consistent pattern throughout,
my problem is that you do change this. If we take 7.1.1, you do change the language because you specify detached and attached housing, which was not in the original statement.
That's
It
what
just calls
additional middle housing types are.
In your mind,
I mean, it's
well,
the objective.
Because they're referring to rental and ownership. Is that what you?
And that just means housing for everybody. I mean, rental and ownership. So anyway, that's kind of.
I think you have, I understand what you have done. So I'm with Chair Massey that I feel that the CPAC has done a lot of work to get to this. Now, maybe the writer of this was not the other writer of the other sections. And because this is not policy, this is a concept, I think it doesn't need to be as specific as what your changes are. For example, you say that, permit a variety of detached, and I guess it doesn't really matter, right? Well, I guess it says the same thing.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the question is this more direct? Is this more clear about what the policy is? And then does it change anything about what the language was that's already there?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to just offer a general comment. I don't know if it applies to everything, but when I look at this 7.1.1, to me, they both say the same thing.
They do.
And I think the first one, in my view, is more understandable.
It's more relatable. It kind of reads similar to the rest of the comp plan. Had we scrubbed the rest of every other chapter or section in a similar way, this is going to sound very different.
Unless it was applied to the other policies without changing their meaning. But I'm so stuck on the language, and the fact that these are directions for someone to go do something. And ultimately, it needs to be easily understandable what this policy is telling somebody to go do. And so if the language that's already there is satisfactory, that's fine. I've offered an alternative that I think is more to the point and maybe more technical, but then that's kind of, we have the luxury as this body of proposing, this or what's already there. And it's not going to hurt my feelings because, again, I haven't changed, anything other than the order of the words and being consistent. But, we're still going to cruise through the rest of the policies anyway, I think, because, we're looking at the housing policies with an eagle eye as it is anyway. And so we can kind of run through this. And if there's anywhere that we feel that one read or the other is more appropriate, then, then we have that luxury of making that choice.
So what I'm also worried about is that council has already passed through a resolution or something, right? The language that's in this?
They did pin these down by resolution, correct?
But again, we were supposed to have a synthesis stage where this kind of tuning would have been allowed, and we didn't really get that. And so that's why it's coming up late.
So the red that came, which is edits by staff, those edits came from public comment that came after the resolution?
Correct. So the housing policies were pinned down, I believe it would have been July of 2019. All of the pinned down policies plus the urban design policies that had not been pinned down were made available for public comment in late October. And we've basically, over the 3 months between late October and late January, accepted public comments. And so the track changes, the red lines in here, are edits that were made based on those public comments. So there are not a whole lot of proposed edits, just I think maybe reflecting that a lot of work had gone into this. But so staff, I think, is anticipating some changes just because there has been a lot of discussion. There was oral testimony, there was written comments provided, and so I think it would be natural to make some edits where you see fit. But yeah, to answer Commissioner Hemer's question, yeah, they were pinned down by resolution, and so yeah, that's just something to keep in mind.
The matrix includes the comments that staff didn't move forward, right?
Or there are some responses within the matrix addressing written comments, oral testimony that was provided on Section 7 where staff is open to changes or, wants to basically suggested that there be additional discussion, additional deliberation by commissioners. And so, yeah, there is a lot to take in on this section.
So I guess I'm going to ask you to predict the future. If we go through and we change the way that the words are organized in this section, is that going to cause a longer discussion with council? Or were they just going to look at the simple changes that we had given because they had already passed it down in resolution?
I think it obviously depends. I mean, I'm not going to try to read the future, but predict the future, but I would imagine there would be some questions from counselors about, I understand that I think the intent is not a whole lot different. There is some different vocabulary. There's a lot more use of verbs like implement, which I know that the city manager is not a huge fan of, talking about implementing programs and things like that, calling those out specifically within the comprehensive plan. And I think the general direction, the suggestions from staff and some of the direction from council has been to defer to the CPAC, in general areas. And so I think commissioners need to balance the needs to improve and clarify and simplify and make more direct language with the amount of work that's gone into it. Because, yeah, there has been. So it's maybe a little bit above my pay grade to be providing the ultimate word on this.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really good point about the city council, because the point is to make things more legible. And if it's not making it more legible, then it's not accomplishing its purpose. And so if you can't look at this and say, you know, you're really not changing the spirit of the policy, this is what the Comp Plan Advisory Committee intended, and then it's not accomplishing its purpose, and the original language is more valuable, in that sense. I mean, there's not supposed to be this big question about, is this really does this say the same thing or not? It's supposed to be the same thing. It's just organized differently so that, I spent my holiday vacation, and I went through 24 different comp plans.
Commissioner Edge,
and
I want you to understand, I believe that you feel that you have not changed any of these policies intentionally or the meaning of it, and I totally believe that. But what my worry is that when it gets to the next level, that somebody that's already passed a resolution on it, somebody that already worked 5 work sessions on it, they're going to look at it and they're going to have to study it a lot harder than they have to do what is already written. And one thing I hate to do is create a bunch of work just to create a bunch of work. And so what I'm trying to do is, and we can go through each one of these and adopt the ones that we like and not adopt the ones that we want, but I just want everybody to get the overall picture that rewriting every single one, even though you're not changing the intent, will cause work down the line. And so if you, and I guess it's up to Chair Massey or it's up to us, but if you feel that strongly that this is a much better written way, then we should go through one, each and every one of them, knowing that it's going to cause work down the line.
We can look at them and we can see if this is what we want to recommend or not on a case-by-case basis for each one. That's fine. I don't expect to have blanket approval of, sight unseen. I mean, I'm prepared to make a case for the language that I chose, and because I don't think I'm changing the meaning of anything. But again, it's the point that I hadn't considered, because again, I did a lot of research, I looked at a lot of comp plans, and I just, and I felt like having this structure, this repetitive, legible structure offers some value down the road. And I've really hoped that we would have had a real Block 4 synthesis stage to go through that process. And so, all I really had time to do was do it with the housing section and offer that up as, geez, if we would have had a synthesis stage, I would have advocated for language like this, for an approach like this, whether it starts off through the zoning ordinance, through a program, through whatever, or starts off with the verb. I don't care. I care about consistency and legibility. And so this is one way, because it's consistent with a lot of other plans that I saw, how, you label an instrument and label the verb and then, describe the policy. So that was the format that I chose and went through with this one section that I felt would be easy to rewrite. But I don't want to make it more difficult. I'm just
I know you don't want to make
disappointed because we were supposed to have Block 4 to go through this stuff.
I'm right there with you.
Can I'm concerned that if we make significant change, which I think this is suggesting significant change, that public comment period is closed. This is a critically important piece of this document. We just went through as a group and decided to change every line of it. And how will that look to a community that's been so invested in communicating their concerns to us? And while I appreciate and understand where you're coming from, Commissioner Edge, I think it's equally as important to respect the fact that they showed up multiple nights, multiple emails, all the work that's already been done. So I think we should review each one of the corrections or adjustments that are being suggested with the lens of in my opinion, more important that we represent the voices of the individuals that created the document and the work that's gone up to this point than it is that it be policy that is so well-crafted and perfectly coordinated, because the rest of the document does not meet the standard of review that you've, put forth here. So there's that. That I don't know if others agree, but that's my suggestion.
Commissioner Burns, we haven't heard from you on this topic.
I'm wondering if, with the review you did, Commissioner Edge, of the 24 other comp plans and the practices that you saw represented there, his staff, are the policies, the language that we're framing them a little bit more colloquially, is that different from most comp plans? Was that intentional?
No, wasn't intentional.
Are you aware that we're doing it different than?
I'm not aware.
I wouldn't say it's different as much as it is, this is a beautiful comp plan. This is a beautiful document. A lot of hard work has gone into this. It is so well prepared. It is, and the language should match. I'm so impressed. I couldn't be more impressed with the body of work that has been created. It's just cleaning up some of the language that and making things read a certain way, and when in the comp plans that I read, they're all over the board, obviously, but the ones, there's some of them are very plain and very direct and very you get to the policy level and there's just no ambiguity, and I felt like that was a great thing to bring to this because it's we've done such a good job with this up to this point. Let's see it through. Let's get it the rest of the way there. And so that was, kind of having this professional, consistent, obsessively consistent approach throughout the policy language, seemed like a good way to kind of, have the whole thing live up to the standard that's, that it's presented as.
I think there is a generally surprisingly high degree of kind of continuity of voice throughout the policy documents, given the number of authors and the number of revisions that we've gone through, and the voice that you're proposing is different, and I accept that it may be better, it being more direct and more clear, but it doesn't feel right to single out this section for that change of language, again, given the attention in this section and the uncertainty that would introduce to the process. So I think what we need to do is go through these one by one and have you defend the proposal that you've put forth, and with a bias that the commission is going to have to maintain the continuity of process, and in cases where you're changing the language but not clearly adding clearly changing something, if the direction you're providing is more for consistency but not actually going to change how it's implemented, then it seems like we would, I agree with Commissioner Roosevelt, we'd need to leave it as is. And I could see the lens that you've taken. If we wanted to take more time and have someone go through and do this systematically throughout the entire document, it would be a different flavor. Maybe it would even be just less comfortable as it is. The language that is written is it's softer and it's more approachable, and maybe that's by design, or maybe we just ended up there. I don't know. So I think we're just going to have to go through line by line. And
I'm comfortable with whatever approach we want to take. I just wanted to offer this up as geez, if we really would have had a block 4.
I'm perfectly willing to go section, policy by policy, but let me ask if there's another alternative. Do you think that you have a hit list of things that you were most concerned about?
No, it was really just reformatting for structure and consistency.
Okay. All right.
I don't feel like I've changed the
Okay.
meaning of any one of these. And so literally, if we walked away from this and didn't implement any of my changes, we have not changed the spirit of the document in any way from what I'm proposing here.
Okay, all right.
So I have absolute comfort with whatever we choose to do.
Okay, then I'll give us about, a minute or so to go through each one of these. So let's just start at 7.1.1.
Chair Massey, if I could offer just one alternative, I mean, just given the amount of involvement that Commissioner Travis had in this, I mean, one option would be to move on to Section 8 and to be dealing with urban design and come back.
Well, I think we would have the same discussions if we started again on another meeting, so I'm inclined to continue.
I would much prefer having a member of the CPAC here because they were in the room for the discussion, and because every time there's a promote or leverage, it becomes implement and support. So I'm not really, or an encourage, it changes it to implement and support. So without the comfortability of knowing what that room was really talking about, I'm really uncomfortable.
I feel like we've got the product
Okay,
that was,
all right.
that
I'm
was
done.
produced
Let's
by
do
the
it.
CPAC.
Longer we talk about it, longer we're going to be here. Let's do it.
7.1.1.
Start the clock.
Yeah.
I think the proposed language is just a little bit more succinct. It just it just states that we're permitting, more housing types in, the various residential areas. I mean, it's really, that's the difference. And so it really doesn't change anything other than just use maybe fewer words. But so I'm not.
I would suggest that could we incorporate the word typology instead of housing choices? Just to,
I'm going to say housing choices, I think, is clearer to a larger audience than typologies.
okay, I would agree with that,
Yeah.
probably. All right. Then I don't see a reason to change 7.1.1.
Anyone in favor of changing 7.1.1? Okay, let's go to 7.1.2.
So let's see what I think for this one. I just don't like the way that it's worded, and I know what it's trying to do, and so I just restated it so that it's doing what it's trying, it's just saying what it's doing, not what it's not doing. And less on the number of housing units. It's so unclear to me.
I would agree, that's kind of odd language that maybe that should be rewritten.
Can we say through the zoning ordinance establish development standards and use that same verb instead of implement?
Yeah, that's not the part I'm stuck on. It's the focus more and focus less.
You're interested more in the site coverage for residential structures and not the less on number of housing units.
Correct.
Density, housing units.
Mr. Kreska?
Mr. Kresko, let me just tell you that this is not a public, hearing at this point, okay, or a public testimony at this point. So I would ask you to keep your comments and so that the commission can continue their deliberations. Thank you.
I'll also note that in the public comment we got, there was a revision request as, I'm sorry, I don't know what attachment number it is, but
Yeah, it's
3 probably. Is it
So
the,
it starts on page 77 of this.
Matrix.
Item 5.1, page 77.
oh, it's also incorporated into the matrix.
The matrix, there's basically about 5.5 or 6 pages within the matrix that deal with section 7, so I would encourage,
Page 79.
yeah, I think starts on 77 and goes through 83, so I'm not,
Yeah.
It's on 79, well, 79 on the
The
old
one I'm
packet.
trying to direct towards is that,
Yeah.
as well as on density and residential neighborhoods, which is on page 79 of the matrix and came from our community members. So
And the subject line by staff response is that there was near consensus on the language by the CPAC.
Yeah, and that's what I get stuck on, is that, again, it feels less clear to me, but yes, there was consensus on that language. I mean, I think state law makes it so that we barely can't barely regulate density anyway, and so, it's, the focus more, focus less, it just feels weird to me, and so having a direct
The reference to
state.
number of housing units is about density. It's about housing units per acre. It's not about just the overall number of housing units. I don't know if that helps the clarity, but it's the idea was, again, to use these standards that talk about form, talk about size, shape, to manage the impacts of multifamily housing, basically, or multiple dwellings.
Commissioner Edge, would you be opposed to adding per acre at the end of your statement? So site coverage for residential structures per acre, which is density?
Well,
Would it change that?
I think that per acre would go with the original language. I'm not, Commissioner Edge's language doesn't create that change, the dichotomy.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think it's implicit that we're going to be focusing less on the number of housing units because we'll have less control, I think, over that. And so you just say what you're going to do. You're going to regulate size, shape, form, and site coverage. That was kind of the point.
I think what the point of the statement is trying to say, you're right, that you're going to focus on that, but density by definition is number of housing units per acre. So what it's trying to say is that, hey, we're going to focus more on the development standards than what necessarily the definition of density is, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the softer language that, I guess some of you are saying you like, whereas I feel like I want this rigid directive, and what I feel comfortable with in a legal document is a rigid directive.
Well, so let me ask this. Isn't the CPIC going to come up with this rigid directive?
Well, they're going to use this language to guide decisions, basically, or they should.
You're a member of the CPIC, right?
Theoretically, yeah.
I don't know, I don't like where you're going with this, Commissioner Hemner. I don't feel like this is one that we should provide recommendation on this,
Okay.
rather than kicking the can. As
I'm not saying kicking the can.
this evening.
Maybe we can synthesize the existing language in Commissioner Edge's proposed change and say, implement development standards that regulate size, shape, and form in addition to the number of housing units.
I want to capture site coverage also, because site coverage is an important thing to regulate through this as well.
I'm not opposed to it, but it also wasn't added by the bodies before us, and so I don't understand the implications of adding it.
I don't think it was, I think the policy, as it was written, it was essentially pay more attention to form than density. That's what that policy means. And I don't know if in Commissioner Edge's language, I don't think that comes across. I think it comes across as, use these tools to manage residential development. It doesn't exclude, neither one of them exclude the use of density regulations.
It doesn't prioritize.
But it was sort of more of a it was focused more on the priority about how you're going to try to get at this stuff. It was also implying that there's some lesser emphasis on the rigid density controls that we use today. And I don't know that that comes across in Commissioner Edge's language.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's literally just do this thing.
Yeah.
You know, the policy is do this thing, and that's, you know, where I tried to take, you know, I mean, that was part of the exercise, was translating the language into a very succinct action item, you know, and so, you know, again, if that doesn't read the way that everyone feels comfortable with, then that's fine.
And I don't think in writing the original policy, I don't think there was an intent that these were the only things that you were going to use to regulate the size, shape, and form. You know, you definitely use lot coverage as part of it. You use landscaping, you use other aspects. There's setbacks, there's, you know, there's a whole bunch of things that come into play.
Again, it was just the focus more, focus less. That's the part
So would it
that
be
is
useful to add-
ambiguous to me.
So would it be useful to add, you know, number of housing units per acre, to the original text?
Well,
Would that be useful?
If there was confusion related to the last part of that, and that helps to clarify that confusion, I think that might be true.
It's not confusing to me.
Well, I think that the comment, the public comment that's being made that we received is about saying, don't not focus on density. We want you to actually consider density in this policy, whereas the original statement is saying, consider density less, or as a less important.
I would say that one potential way would be I would need to think about how we would rephrase this. You know, we would be considering this, you know, form, size, shape, as opposed to exclusively relying on density, which in our current code is basically the way that we do it within the R5, the R7, R10 zones. You really can't do anything other than a single-family home or a duplex if you have a really large lot. So I think it's expanding opportunities to, you know, in support of, you know, policy language that would be supportive of some of the changes that are likely going to come out of the implementation work from the CPIC. I would say, you know, if there's a way to say, and not exclusively on density, I think would be maybe a better way to do it.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. It's consistent with the spirit of the policy, which is what's important. I'm just, again, I personally am hung up on the soft language, and, you know, but that's not for everyone else to worry about.
So the change here is, and not exclusively on the number of housing units?
Or,
Density.
I think density probably is
Okay.
a better word.
I agree.
Then the public comment also had style and quality in there, which I guess, right, that's not really meant to be in this development standard, right? I mean, style and quality is more of a, well, I guess, right? I guess that is a,
I mean, it just depends on how prescriptive we want to get as far as things like style, as opposed to relying on.
but it's not really about this.
This is the equity goal section. So style is not necessarily important to equity.
Okay. Good enough
Yeah,
for me?
I didn't think it was consistent, and I would recommend not including style, quality.
Style or quality. Okay, no problem.
Can we move to 7.1.3?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay, now I'm starting to get it. So you create an action in every one of these, while the other ones are just suggestions. Yeah, yeah.
So I think they both refer to the city's code. they both recognize equal access for the same groups. I think your rewording is just in your own language more specific or more controlled.
I basically used housing access as opposed to remove or prevent potential barriers to home ownership and rental opportunities.
Okay, so it doesn't change it, it doesn't amend the intent behind the original, it just,
I would disagree.
It's different.
I would disagree, because forget everything after a, that and two, because that's just add on to the sentence. So the sentence says promote zoning and code requirements. His statement says implement a program. It certainly is not the same.
Well, you have to have a program to do any
I hear you.
zoning and code.
But the first one doesn't even suggest a program.
yeah, and I think it intentionally,
So what Commissioner Edge is saying is that, hey, look, a program could come out of this. So why don't we just say, create a program?
What would be the other instrument that you use to do this?
You could start a DEI.
Well, I think it's a code audit function to do this. It's evaluating the code in relation to this work. One of the things we're going to be doing with the CPIC is a code audit. I just was going to write myself a note that maybe this is language we pull into the RFQ for that work, the consultant work. But
okay.
Again, the more important thing to me here was really cleaning up the language to, this really long run-on thing that's hard to interpret to say housing access. That was kind of that's the big move in this one.
I just have to disagree, because housing access requires, there's just an intelligibility about the comfort, the softness, whatever you want to call it, to the way the original statement reads, that is more legible to a wider community.
Yeah, don't forget you're talking to a software engineer.
No. Others?
I'm good with the original language.
I'm good with the original language.
Let's move on.
Okay, can we go to 7.1.4?
Can I make a copy of
Yeah, so why did the word leverage, leverage is definitely a very soft word to use in this statement. Why not say implement and support?
Leverage to me means working with others' resources rather than city resources is how I would interpret that.
The revised statement is not exclusive of that.
Anyone want to offer changes to the original language?
I like Commissioner Edge's statement a little bit better than I like the original one, except I don't know if, once again, it's leverage resources and programs, and this says implement and support programs. So I don't know if leverage is used as that verb meant to be.
think we're always leveraging resources, but, whatever. I mean, again, it's soft language, and so, I feel like it's trimming fat. Other people might feel like it's, is offering some, reassurance of some option.
If I were starting from scratch, I would go with Commissioner Edge's language, but we're not starting from scratch, so I would leave it as is.
I'm comfortable with the original language.
I agree.
I was on your side on that one.
Yeah, that's right.
7.1.5.
I'm on both sides on all of these. So.
Better than my phone.
I think this is another one where Commissioner Edge's language might be better, but introducing the concept of incentives is probably more of a substantial change than we want to make.
Although we do use the word incentivize throughout this document. How about incentivize development of new homes?
I mean, does that mean providing funding?
Well, encourage means a lot wider of a variety. So encourage could mean you had the guy at Mission Oaks, and the mayor goes out there and says, hey, instead of building single-family residency, why don't we do a whole bunch of cottage clusters? That's encouraging. Implementing and supporting is something a little bit more
Are we setting up a quid
straightforward.
pro quo?
Encourage is definitely.
I didn't say no, well, assuming that the mayor doesn't own the land or isn't going to live in any of those, I guess. But you understand there's lots of ways to encourage.
Agreed. I just recognizing that incentivize and the encourage incentives is used throughout this document.
Well, I wouldn't,
I'm in favor of keeping the original statement. I agree that the proposed changes are more beautifully written, very eloquent.
yeah, and I hope at the CPIC that, that the statement is made by one of the members of that says, hey, you know what, because of policy 7.15, we should implement and support programs. Here's an idea, some programs.
I don't want to suggest that it needs to be A or B. I mean, I think there can still be edits. There can be blending of Commissioner Edge's suggested edits if you don't want to make wholesale changes. I don't want commissioners to feel like it's all or nothing.
No, I don't think that we feel that
I don't
way.
think we feel that way. I think if
Okay.
there's something that jumps at us that we think we want to change, I think we're going to do it. Yeah. I'm good with the original language on 7.1.5.
Oh, I skipped right over that.
I'm sorry, 7.1.4. I got ahead of myself.
Oh, I thought
No, we were on
on
7.1.5.
We're on 5.
Yeah, and I said
Oh, I'm sorry.
I would suggest we keep it as it is.
Yep, I agree.
I mean, do you want to add incentive in there somewhere?
I think you just spent the last 5 minutes telling me not to.
Well,
I don't want to.
okay.
Okay, then
Okay, let's consider 7.1.6, which begins with consider.
I like the use of diversity, equity, and inclusion committee and recognizing that in this edit, suggested edit.
Yeah. I would suggest that we don't name a committee.
Agreed.
Oh.
That's a recommendation that we're going forward.
Yeah,
So,
that does not exist yet.
Yeah.
This
But can we
drafting
just
did
use-
precede any of that discussion.
Yep.
So.
Should we use DEI without saying committee?
Like, consider DEI.
Yeah.
That would be okay.
I would agree with that.
So where would the DEI go?
Consider cultural preferences, diversity, equity, and inclusion when adopting development and design standards.
I'm good with that.
That sounds good to me. We should keep values in there, too. Cultural preferences, comma, values, comma, diversity, comma, equity, and inclusion when adopting development and design standards, including but not limited to, blah, 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 blah.
So you're saying cultural preferences, comma, values, and DEI? Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
Isn't inclusion doesn't that encompass cultural preferences and values?
Maybe
You
it's
know
in
what?
lieu
You're-
of, yeah.
You're talking to the wrong generation to be asking me those questions. I don't know.
It's quite a list.
It is quite a list. But if it's important for us to put in the diversity and equity and inclusion, this seems like a decent spot.
Okay.
As we heard earlier, there's a lot of definitions for DEI. Can we go to 7.1.7?
Yeah, I would say we don't need to change that language. That's a pretty straightforward comment. And I don't think that we need a program to periodically review it.
Everything's a program, or it's either programmed or it doesn't happen.
So, I mean,
That's just kind of a default word, you know.
well, let's just say if you don't support the Fair Housing Act, you have other means, that people have other means to get restitution from it.
I would note that there are a couple places in the document where there are things that the city is already required to do by either federal or state law, but that we felt was important enough of a policy statement to have it as a policy, and this is one of them. There are some other sections where we basically say to comply with state or federal regulations, which if you don't do, you're going to be in trouble. You don't really need it in your comp plan, but we felt that it was important enough to include.
We certainly don't have to have a periodic review over it, because what's going to happen is that if they change the rule, then the city has to go through and change its code.
Well, look what happened with FEMA, you know. I mean, we were out of compliance with FEMA and didn't know it, and then we did the audit and we find out we have to make some changes. So, you know, without a program to periodically review, that doesn't happen, and we then find out we're out of compliance through some other accidental way. You know, I mean, that was kind of in my opinion, the lesson learned was, you know, plan ahead and expect that have a periodic review so you can make sure these things are consistent, you know, with whatever changes come. That was the intent of that, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the Fair Housing Act compliance comes through the consolidated plan at the county level. And so I think we would need to, if we did want to be referencing programs, we just need to note that it's not necessarily city programs. It could be collaboration or supporting programs.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can go to 7.1.8.
So no change on
No.
7.17?
I mean, this is effectively unchanged, and we can keep the.
Well, except you throw the city in there. I would say implement and support partner programs to address the needs and take city and out.
At that point, I think you don't need to change it, right?
I'm fine with it as is.
Yeah, I am too.
Okay.
1.9?
Oh, except, can somebody explain to me, I know what a Conestoga hut is, right? It's the same thing that you go out when you go camping and they set up the yurt. It's like a yurt, right? Am I right?
It's just different. I mean, it's a different model.
What is a sleeping pod?
It essentially, yeah, it's just a really small structure, essentially designed just for, it's not
Like a
fully-
lean-to? But a little bit more permanent?
Like a,
one-man tent?
no, it's just a shelter just for sleeping. So it's like a tent, but it's not made of tent materials.
But made out of more,
It's a hard
Yeah.
surface.
More durable,
Hard surface,
but
yeah.
less, not completely permanent and a fix, but basically providing for the needs for,
now, I know that we add lists to the ends of some things to use as examples like we did, such as protecting birds from hitting windows and wildlife corridor, which we added in. Doesn't alternative shelter models just kind of cover all of that? Or
Yeah, I
do
would,
we want to throw in those specific, I don't really care. I mean,
they seem so specific, and I'm not sure the last time I've ever heard the word.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm sure
this-
it's a new word. New words like this pop up all the time. And that's kind of one of the things that's like, okay, well, maybe sleeping pods go out of fashion and they're stand-up pods or...
Yeah, and this language came from a public comment from somebody very invested in, expanding services and housing opportunities for houseless persons. And, the specific references to Conestoga huts and sleeping pods comes from the fact that there's been some delegation from what was previously kind of state requirements. They've delegated some of that authority to the local level where you can allow these things through your local codes, as opposed to you used to have to rely on the state code, and the state building code wasn't super flexible around these types of things, and so it was calling out that additional local authority. But if commissioners feel that it's too specific, we can take that out and just rely on kind of the more all-encompassing alternative shelter models.
I
think, I would argue against that. I think it helps provide clarity, but it's the such as that gives you more flexibility. This is just examples of what we mean by alternative shelter models. I really don't know.
Right, I don't know what alternative shelter models means
I agree.
And
either.
Mary just passed me a note. A great suggestion would be to just potentially keep it as alternative shelter models, and then have a call-out box and list some examples.
The call-out box would be a great idea.
That works, yeah.
If you put the call-out box in the policies, right? And not just in the...
Yeah, it's in the policy section. It would be like right next to it.
Great idea, Mary.
Thank you.
I'm good with that.
1.9.
So I completely and totally disagree with Commissioner Edge's statement. I don't think that that is necessarily what that statement is meant to say. I don't know.
I don't know what tenant protection policies do if you're not, putting.
I don't know how city code amendments can actually go and do tenant protection policies. It would all be through either law enforcement. It would be through law. There's no city code that you can give
What's the
tenant
housing
protection
emergency
policies.
accomplishing?
Absolutely nothing, literally.
In terms
but
of,
but it's not city code.
anti-displacement.
But it's not city code. It's just a resolution. It's through
Isn't there some
This is
tenant
a city
protection?
council.
No, we have
Appointed.
we have a no cause eviction ordinance that has largely been superseded by some of the legislation that was passed in 2019, but.
And that is
we
in
did-
city code, right?
That was, it was an ordinance, so it added a section.
But there's
to the
nothing you can do
municipal
in
code.
land use. It's not a land use code, right?
It's fair.
It's not within Title 19, but it's within, I believe, Title 5. I forget what title it's in. No, it's in, I can't remember what section it's in, but it's within the city municipal code. It deals with, obviously, issues peripherally related to housing policy, but it's not within the zoning code. But you don't necessarily need to have it within the zoning code.
This could be, zoning mobile home parks for mobile home parks exclusively, for instance. That's.
Actually, you know what? I actually like your statement better than I do like the original statement. Well, I'll tell you why. Implement and support city, I would say implement and support programs to reduce the displacement of renters and just leave it at that.
It's fine with me.
I like that much better than reduce the placement of renters through tenant protection policies.
Me too.
State that again.
Implement and support programs To reduce the displacement of renters.
I can live with that.
Staff?
Yeah, I think we're comfortable with that.
Okay.
Unless if somebody's going to get that somebody fought really hard to get tenant protection policies in there. Which I could see two people that, on city council that will fight very hard for that.
That's a mechanism, but
I know.
I think the language that you're proposing is broader than just tenant protection policies.
All right. I say go with that.
1.10?
these are all very consistent from section to section.
Oh, I'm sorry, there wasn't any change.
That one was good. Hey,
Oh, wow,
hey,
sorry.
we'll go with that one.
Good job. Okay, we're moving quite along. We're at 7.2, 2.1.
Did we want to talk about the subsection goal?
Well, okay,
Language
good
inline.
point. Did we get finished with the 7.1 goal?
No, we kind of skipped it.
All right. I'm sorry, let's go back and tackle it so we can claim victory somehow.
So it's the equity, goal 7.1 equity, just that one right there.
Yeah, you know what? Your equity is very nice.
What?
It's nice. It's a nice statement. I actually like it kind of better than the first. All I'm wondering is, the addition of public and private and public investment that is not necessarily called out specifically in that upper one.
It's provide housing options.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, right, private and public investment do provide the housing options. Well, we could say enable and encourage private and public investment in housing to satisfy demand for options, and then cross out housing there.
Yeah, I'm not fond of the provide verb, but
No, we'd say enable and encourage private and public investment of housing to satisfy demand for options that meet the needs of all residents with a specific focus on uplifting historically disenfranchised communities.
yeah, it doesn't change the meaning of, it doesn't change the meaning at all. I'm totally cool with that.
But does the private and public investment change the meaning of what that statement's supposed to say?
I don't think it does. I think that that's an acknowledgement of fact. But, that's for you guys to decide. I'm fine with, changing it or not changing it, so.
What were your recommendations to change Commissioner Edge's language?
So what I would say is enable and encourage private and public investment in housing to satisfy demand options that meet the needs of all residents, and then the whole rest of it.
Wow, you were going to add all of that to the beginning of the overarching section goal 7?
No, we're not talking about the overarching section goal. We're talking about goal 7.1,
7.1.
equity.
I apologize.
I guess, but it's also supposed to describe what equity is.
Uplifting historically disenfranchised communities and
No, I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you.
Are all of the policies supposed to grow out of this goal? Because if that's the case.
Oh, special needs, comma, aging populations, comma, or lower incomes. We need to
Yeah.
make sure we capture that.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
The organization of these goals, as I read the document, is that there's a broader goal. In this instance, it's equity, 7.1. And then under 7.1, a variety of policies are designed to implement the goal. Does perhaps the inclusion of private and public investment unnecessarily limit the policy choices below? Because as I read through the policies that we all went through, that we just went through, several of them don't involve private or public investment. I understand what I think Commissioner Edge is trying to get at, but the way that the document's organized, I think it's a limiting factor for what grows out of it. And so I would propose enable and encourage housing options that meet the needs of all residents. I love Commissioner Edge's language after that, but that one clause is a little bit limiting. I just offer that for consideration.
I concur.
So is the answer enable and encourage housing options to satisfy demand that meet the needs of all residents with a specific focus on uplifting historically disenfranchised communities and eliminating disparities for populations with special needs, aging, lower incomes or lower incomes?
I'm good with that. Did you capture that, David?
I'll be watching that one on the video.
Okay. But you got it marked, right?
I do.
Okay.
Denny may have it.
I got it.
All right.
Can we go to 7.2?
Yes.
Don't we have to do the overarching section goal at the
Yeah,
top?
that's what I,
Okay.
I think, did we want to go through
Them all at
kind of
once?
all of the, all the section goals and section policies and come back to that? I thought we had discussed that, but maybe not.
Okay.
I don't know.
So were the overarching section goals were added later, right?
Correct. There were certain sections that we did that for. We didn't do it for the things in block 1, which were like history, arts, and culture, and that's why it's been added. And then we somehow forgot to do it in the housing block, even though that was one of the later blocks, so it was added later.
Well,
Correct.
I think it's because we had all these goal statements that,
Yeah, and so this overarching housing section goal was not vetted by
The CPAC.
the CPAC, so
Okay.
I would say of all the goals and policies, this is the one to really go to town on. So
Yeah, that was my intuition, was that some of these hadn't gone through the CPAC
correct.
to get here, and so we have a little bit more flexibility perhaps with those, because we're not changing a body of work that came before
So do we
us.
want to tackle
That's
that
correct.
now? We want to get through all of 7 before we end.
Are we talking about going to 8 first?
No.
If you just want to do this,
Feel comfortable doing the overreaching section goal now.
I don't care.
let's do it later.
okay, thank you. So goal 7.2.
Yep.
I'm not understanding that rationale, but
Don't worry about it.
Because I've got an attachment that has all of the section goals on it, and you can just kind of go down and see.
Got it.
And I've got a whole narrative and.
Keynotes,
Okay.
footnotes.
I would point you to his January 28th email, which starts with, "You're going to kill me," but
Right.
the one, yeah.
Yeah.
It did start that way. I don't know if you saw it.
Hate me. Hate me.
So if we're on 7.2, I would like to refer back to what Justin, or our city attorney, Justin had said, that we should probably leave this alone because we add in that public and private investment again.
Yep.
Okay. 2.1?
So I think Commissioner Edge's statement is a lot different than what that policy originally reads.
All right.
And the reason is because now it's a periodic review program. And this is basically saying, hey, continue to research and leverage and implement housing affordability strategies.
Oh, that's fair. Continually versus periodically
Yeah, you know.
is what you're taking issue with?
Yeah, I mean, well, they're basically saying, hey, we'll look at housing affordability strategies, and you're basically saying we're going to implement and support a program that periodically reviews and then adopts.
You're either going to implement and support a program to continue to research, leverage, and implement, or you're going to do it periodically. So, it's, again, don't get hung up on the verb to start with, because we've already decided that we're not going to do that because it's not consistent with everything else.
Original language, okay?
Yep.
2.2.
We already read that one?
There's a similar policy for these in the equity section. This is affordability, though.
So we
there's-
decided against some of this verbiage, the housing typology,
Right.
the variety of detached and attached. So I would suggest we stick with, or make small adjustments to 2.2 as is.
Did we make any adjustments to the previous one?
We added per unit about the density thing.
Okay, yep.
It's just more verbose in the original language, to the point of detriment, in my opinion, but
So for consistency, what did you think we need to do here about the per?
But we don't need to add in because we're not actually talking about density at all. Or
just referring to the zones.
the definition of density.
Okay.
Wait, could we not just say allow and encourage development of housing types that can meet the needs of lower or moderate income households, including middle housing types and low, medium density zones, as well as larger apartment and condominium developments in high density and mixed use zones? We don't need to say with lower construction cost and sales prices per unit that can help.
Exactly.
I agree that is a little cattywampus. It's in there, it's in there because somebody wanted it in there, but
I think it's in there just because this is the affordability section, and they wanted to, there was a desire to call out that, there might be when you have especially attached housing, that there's, potential for lower construction costs. But if the commissioners feel it muddies it up, and it should just be implied that this policy is in the affordability section, and
Well, it says meets the needs of low or moderate income households.
I suppose it would distinguish subsidized housing from cheaper housing that's outright affordable. And maybe that's the intent.
well, is it really the needs or the amount of money that they can spend? We are in the affordability, right?
this would be this would be focused on the affordability needs as opposed to,
Well, instead of saying the needs, how about meet the affordability of?
That are affordable to
Yeah.
There you go.
allow and encourage development of housing types that are affordable to lower moderate income households.
I like it.
Yep, I do too.
I'm comfortable with that.
And once again, we have the public comment that throws in the style and quality, and since we scratched it off for the other one, are we good with scratching it off from this one?
I disagree, yep.
Yeah.
It's not affordability related.
2.3?
It basically doesn't need to be changed.
2.4?
Same deal.
2.5?
I actually like, okay, never mind, I'm sorry. won't say
Why are we putting middle housing in quotations in 2.4? It wasn't in quotations in 2.2.
yeah, there's some phantom quotation marks that have been showing up in this document. I guess I have a haunted computer. So we'll try to.
And a
You're not
blind
making-
editor.
2.5?
I actually like Commissioner Edge's stronger language in this one. I think all it does is it creates a little bit stronger language and a little bit more intent. It doesn't, none of it really changes the meaning.
So the difference is implement and support programs to expand and leverage.
Yeah, I mean, it already says expand partnerships, so that's already actually written in there.
But everything else is verbatim.
Yep.
Yep.
So is there any other reason why you prefer it,
I like,
Commissioner Hebner?
I like the stronger language.
To give more flexibility, do you think, to how that is achieved, or is it more intentional? Is there more intent?
Nope. I think it's fine the way it is.
Because then you add in, you implement support programs to expand and leverage. So, I mean, yeah, I actually like it a little bit better.
Tiebreaker?
As is.
As is.
Bias towards as is in the event of a tie.
I mean, if you like the verb leverage, I mean, and that can be included without including the implement and
It's true, you could just do expand and leverage.
I'm good with that.
Fine.
2.6?
This is the same deal. It's unchanged. The difference is the specifying the tool up front by which you would do the thing. It's not necessary if we're not calling out the tools, that we're doing the thing with, so.
Okay, 2.7?
Well, we do have a public comment that says in limited specified area. You actually can't put limited specified areas on mobile homes, right? By state law?
Yeah, there was some back and forth with Mr. Kraska just as far as what the state laws were, and I need to pull up the matrix just as far as where we ended up on that.
I now see that the bottom of this 7.26, which is a later comment on 128, so it must have been after our last planning commission meeting or thereabouts.
I suggest we remove the word choice after housing and put type, which is consistent with other policies. Housing types, not choices.
Oh, okay.
I'm a fan of consistency.
Cool.
And are mobile homes inherently have to meet the design standards of a residential single-family home on a single lot?
They do. They need to meet our design. If we have, in a single-family zone where single-family design standards apply, they would need to meet those design standards.
Okay.
2.7 is unchanged, so, we can.
Okay, 2.8?
Leave as is.
So this does change a little bit. I feel like the wording is wonky as is. So you're clearly defining and implementing the code provisions as opposed to implementing code provisions that clearly permit. That's the main difference there.
Clearly define and implement development code provisions to permit.
I changed my vote. Go with Commissioner Edge's language.
What's that?
I'm with you now.
Okay.
Why do you need the word clearly in there? Why can't it just say implement
Well,
development?
okay, so here's the thing, is that this language did come from the CPAC, right? So clearly was an intentional word, but I don't think they meant to clearly define code provisions. I think you want to clearly permit.
Why is permitting ambiguous?
Yeah, why, yeah, that's what I don't understand.
I don't understand why clearly was in there, and I was at the meeting.
So why can't we just say implement
guys
development code
remember
provisions to
clearly at all?
permit shelters
I
and
don't remember.
transitional housing for people without housing?
Okay, yeah,
I think we seek to clearly define everything, I hope. So implement, just implement.
No, I mean, we do permit shelters now, but we require them to act like a hotel where they have to have a sprinkler system, which which provides, of course, a financial hindrance to having a shelter.
Well, that's a comment on policy, not on this.
Right, and so maybe that's what they meant by clearly. I don't know. I mean, I can't think of anything else.
I think it would have been worded differently if we had intended for this to be, through clear and objective standards. I think we would have worded it differently. So it was to, set out what that process is in a clear way. And we might end up with clear and objective standards for transitional housing with either type of language here, with either option. But I don't think it meant we would use different words if we meant clear and objective.
right, and so I don't think it is clear and objective. I think it's just to clearly allow them.
Yeah.
And so if we think that that clearly is not offering any.
I don't think it helps one way or the other. I don't think you need the word.
Yeah.
The only way I could see that word modifying anything that makes sense is if I put 2 commas in. And what I'm curious is whether or not they needed or were trying to get at clearly defining shelters and transitional housing.
Okay, sure.
Do we need that? So if you said clearly defined, comma, and implement development code provisions to permit, comma, shelters and transitional housing for people without housing. It doesn't make sense. I'm not proposing we put commas in. My question is there any ambiguity in the definition of shelters or transitional housing that they were trying to get at that may now have been cleaned up by some, well, I guess it's now proposed legislation, so it hasn't been.
Yeah, well, we have transitional housing in our code today, but it is not about necessarily people without housing. It's about transition programs for alcohol, drug abuse, other types of systems. So, that may have been why we stuck in clearly defined.
That actually makes sense.
Yeah.
And the way Commissioner Edge has proposed, I don't think clearly is necessary.
Correct.
But above, if they were trying to get at something to do with defining these types of housing that they wanted code provisions developed for.
It's a little ironic that it's not clear. Okay, so is the suggestion to add the commas so that there's clarity and definition
I like
appropriate as
I
well as?
I thought we were just taking Commissioner Edge's suggestion with removing clearly. Is that what I heard?
I think that accomplishes the same thing.
As long as everybody's comfortable that shelters and transitional housing, everybody understands what is meant by those terms. That's the only reason I could think that they were using the term.
I think state law is going to help us do
It's
that
gonna help
now.
us, yeah.
And then the other thing is I have a note on this, that in policy 7.18, we say that, the needs of unhoused persons, and we make a list: temporary shelters, alternative shelter models, long-term houses, and supported services. So why would we not, in this, implement
Reference the
development
same call
code
out.
provisions to permit shelters, alternative shelter models, long-term housing, or transitional housing and long-term housing for people without housing?
Well, I think the issue here is the permitting process for these unconventional housing, and I think that in that longer list, there's more conventional housing that is permitted.
Well, I don't
Easily.
think alternative shelter models are.
I would agree, but there's some pretty standard housing models in that
What-
long list.
What if it were implement clear development code provisions to permit shelters and transitional housing for people without housing?
Does that mean clear and objective? Does that mean clear?
No, that's like a,
Okay.
that's a, and I'm just a,
Planner thing, yeah.
does anybody agree? Implement clear development code provisions?
I hope all of our development.
Well, somebody thought it should be a policy, Denny, so.
Well, I gotta think that the reason we put it in there was because today transitional housing doesn't include specifically spell out houseless people. What it refers to are those programs like,
Okay, right.
yeah. So I mean, I
Okay,
think.
so then you're
I'd say
suggesting we take out clear and
Yeah,
we call it.
I mean, I think I don't think it is needed.
Okay, so my suggestion is we take out clearly defined and leave the rest.
Sure.
Cool.
Okay? 2.9.
Doesn't need to change. It's fine as is.
2.10.
I mean, it's not really changing anything.
2.11 was good. How's everybody feeling?
So far, so good.
Press on, 7.3?
Yep.
Okay. You were good with 7.3?
Yep.
Goal statement?
Yep.
3.1.
So this is a little bit more specific, but, ultimately, it's, as long as we're happy with what is said, then it's probably fine as is. It touches on all of the relevant points.
Okay, 3.2.
Yeah, it's just an effort to kind of put a little bit of definition around, provide additional flexibility, but it's not really necessary, I suppose.
3.3.
I don't think incentives can require, right? Use incentives to encourage and where appropriate require. I think the whole point of incentives, right?
Use incentives to encourage, and then separate thought, and where appropriate, require.
If there was no comma,
It's
I
all-
think you would,
Require and incentive.
I think the.
Justin, how many commas should we have?
This one's got a lot,
It should
doesn't it?
be hyphens.
I mean, I think it's kind of jumbled, but the way I read it grammatically is use incentives to encourage. That's in a situation where it would be voluntary, and in certain, I can't remember which commissioner said it, but then that comma connotes to me where it's appropriate require, so that would be through code or something like that, where it's something that you're actually going to require. New housing,
development, redevelopment, and rehabilitation projects to include features that include energy efficiency.
Right, but does that make sense, the way that the sentence is broken up with commas? Use incentives to encourage, comma, and where appropriate, require, comma.
I think it does, according to Mrs. Zanarini in 8th grade, but I could be wrong.
Okay. All right.
But the
I think if
the
you,
reason we have it that way, though, is because we can't require all of those things today.
Okay.
I think if you changed use incentives to incentivize, if you said incentivize and where appropriate require,
Yeah.
I think that smooths it out a little
That's
bit.
an excellent
Oh,
suggestion.
okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Nice work.
Can we go back to 7.3.1?
There's no going back.
No, you can't.
How come we don't talk about like solar energy, or I know we're not using clean energy or something like that in that statement? Is that not environmentally or socially sustainable practice?
So you're suggesting that renewable, for example, location of solar panels be considered?
Yeah, well, it's about, ensure that the scale and location of new housing is, consistent with city goals, and don't we have
We could say clean energy, I suppose.
there you go.
No, it's not about, okay.
It's about having, it's about making sure that there's spaces that aren't covered with buildings.
It's the relationship between the building and the natural
That's what this policy is about, is making sure that
environment.
there are spaces, ample spaces that are not covered by buildings.
Oh, okay, so which,
Oh, I see what
This
you're
wouldn't
saying.
be the appropriate
Okay, all right,
place.
so that does not, okay.
I think it's covered elsewhere, is it not?
Well, it could be. I just had that note, and,
Okay.
3.4, is that right?
yeah. Yeah, we can-
Really fond of my amendment.
I know you really like that, but, and it's totally a land use guy's statement. Yeah, we need to simplify that one up a little bit.
I'm really fond of this.
I know you really like it, and I can see that. And you know what? Adam Argo would have really liked it too.
It's good stuff. Locate mutually supportive and hiring.
Yeah, let's keep it simple. That's my suggestion.
Again, it doesn't change the meaning at all, so we can absolutely use what's there, but
3.5.
same story. I almost reused it.
Yeah, there it is again.
3.5.
Yeah, I would say let's keep it a little bit simple.
Chair Massey, I just want to remind you that it's 10:15, and we'll need to extend the meeting if we're going to stay past 10 o'clock.
Yeah, we do that at 10 though, right?
Do a couple minutes.
9:59.
No, we do it before, yeah.
We're going to get done by 10.
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I like your optimism as well.
I mean, there's not significant changes in a lot of these, so, a lot of these are fine the way they are.
7.35, we're good with the original statement?
I agree.
If you liked 4, then you'd like 5, so.
Right?
Ooh, give me 3.6.
Again, this is just about kind of directing the CPIC in the direction of a mechanism to do the thing, but, again, it's,
That's not what we're doing.
the rest of these are good, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would just leave 7.3.6. It's,
Okay, we want to go to 3.8?
Wait, did you skip 3.7?
I didn't see anything changed.
no changes.
Well, I mean, Commissioner Edge has his,
Oh, I'm sorry, okay, what did,
I don't know. I'm just
Okay.
throwing it out there.
all right.
He didn't have any, he doesn't have any on 7.3.7.
But there are 4 other commissioners here
That
who
might want
might.
to change something.
So I'd like a moment to reflect.
Commissioner Hedge, it looked like you started to burn out a little bit about this point when you were in your notes to...
His wife was saying, will you come to bed already?
I was trying to get this out the door
Right.
before lunch on the day of the meeting.
I'm happy with 3.7.
Thank you. 3.8?
So we did receive a public comment that talks about kind of slow growth reductions with added some proportionality to available density. I'll actually read what it says. Allow for incremental specified reductions in required off-street parking in proportion to allowable density for new development within specified distance of light rail stations and frequent bus service corridors running through existing residential areas.
Ooh,
Really descriptive for a policy.
that's exactly. It's kind of out of context with the rest of the policies.
Okay?
3.9?
So I think, while I think it was wordy, I do think it's worth reflecting to see if we could boil it down.
You're talking about 3.8?
Yeah, so in proportion to allowable density,
Well, I think maybe one of the,
allow for a reduction in required off-street parking in proportion to allowable density for new development within close proximity to.
well, what I actually like the idea of specified distance because we actually specify a distance, right? Isn't that the quarter
We
mile
can, but we
thing?
should use industry standards, I mean, there's standard measurements for these things. And so, we don't just come up with arbitrary distances. I think that we should rely on, a half mile for light rail stations and a quarter mile for frequent transit. Those are considered walkable distances.
But those are industry standards.
Those are industry standards.
So why not specified distances?
I mean, we can. I'm just saying the distances that are suggested here are much less than what the industry standard
I'm
practice
sorry.
is.
I'm reading the note from 12820, and I'm just reading the red section.
Right.
So there were several, if you look higher up in the table, there were several.
A few rows down from where I was looking.
There were several iterations.
So instead of close proximity, I actually like specified distance, because we actually specify distance, right? I mean, that's a standard?
Well, I think our thought is we would specify the distance within the zoning codes.
Right.
I mean, if you want to call for a specified distance without naming that specified distance, I think that if that's the direction, then.
Yeah, well, instead of close proximity, a specified distance. Because
The words specified distance or a specified distance?
The words.
The words.
The words.
So the zoning code would define a specified distance.
Right. Which it already, right, which is industry
Which it
standard.
would do. I mean, it would most likely do.
Correct, yeah, the plan is that the zoning code, I mean, if you're going to have this type of criteria in your zoning code, you need to have it at a specified distance. So it's a question of whether the policy language should be referencing a specified distance without, not the specified distance, but the term specified distance. And so, yeah, if that's the direction, then that's something
I
that we can
think
consider.
one thing to consider too is at some point in time, knowing the length or the time of this, or the life of this document, proximity can mean different things. It's not necessarily a distance. a time measurement or something like that. So I'm just saying you're being more limiting by putting a specific distance in there, whereas close proximity could tie to other transit modes or a variety of other things.
And technically, something could be close proximity, but it could be so far up a steep hill that it's not really walkable in all practicality.
Well, it could be a
And so-
specified distance and not.
And that's what I mean is, it could be a specified distance, but if it's a steeper grade than ADA allows for a sidewalk, then it's not really usable, even though it's within a specified distance. And so I think the close proximity gives you a little bit more discretion to interpret what really is proximal.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not really,
Okay, would you recommend then allow for incremental specified reductions in required off-street parking in proportion to allowable density for new development within specified distance of light rail stations and frequent bus services corridors running through existing residential areas?
On what schedule is this incremental?
The other policies don't have these level of caveats in general. I mean, we're not going through and like caveating most of the policies. It feels a little.
so this is a reflection of what we already do. We already give a 50% reduction in parking when you're close to a light rail. It's not even a variance. So you get this 50% reduction from the standard.
In certain zones, yeah, it's different in different zones, but yeah, up to 50%.
But those zones happens to surround the light rail station we have in town. Now, what the question is that what happens, what you call a frequent bus service corridor, I don't even know what that means. I would say that we have a Jackson Street mall, that
Frequent service is one bus line that runs with 15-minute headways. So the bus comes every 15 minutes or less. And that's a TriMet.
All the time?
Yes, and
Yes.
that's also an
all right,
industry
so
standard.
that's about the transit center here in Milwaukee, because I can't
No,
imagine.
it's the McLaughlin bus, the
Oh, I forgot
33.
about
The
McLaughlin.
75 bus is frequent service,
75, which one does that run?
32nd.
32nd and Johnson Creek.
Okay.
And if you look at the bus stop, it actually says frequent service on it.
Okay. I don't think that incremental and specified needs to be in this document. I would go for, and the proportion to allowable density doesn't really jive with all this.
I'm just saying it's one of the comments from community members.
No, I know. I would be comfortable putting the specified distance to the close proximity. If we were to put in the comment running through existing residential areas, I don't really know what that means, because it can change.
Yeah, I want to leave this one alone.
So you want to leave it,
Yeah, even when I prefixed it with through the zoning ordinance, I didn't change any of the other words.
That's all he wanted to do.
okay.
It's,
Are we good with 3.8 as it is?
I am, yes.
Commissioner?
What was your comment about density? Why you didn't want to include it?
Because what happens is that in this portion, this is just allowing for off-street parking.
For a reduction.
Right, for a reduction, which we already do, right? It adds in the frequent bus service corridors, which we don't currently have rules for.
So I think the concern might be where you have a high-density apartment complex and you reduce the number of
I
parking.
think, no. I think the concern is that if you have a high-frequency bus route, that means that you can increase the density. So this is basically trying to say, hey, don't necessarily increase density on high-frequency bus routes.
No.
Yes, no. That's not what this policy says. That's what
Proposal says.
that's what the comment from,
Yeah, the comment is trying to change the meaning of the policy from what the Comp Plan Advisory Committee recommended.
yeah. That's the way I read it.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think there is a concern about doing that, right? There's a concern about doing that. The concern being where in
I'd be
the,
happy to cross off frequent bus service corridors.
it has
think
nothing
it's
to do with
critically
bus service
important.
corridors.
Yes, it does. Has
This,
everything
my
to do with
comment doesn't. My
I'm
comment
not,
doesn't.
excuse me, we don't have a lot of, 3.8 is providing some difficulties here.
We have 3 minutes before.
Yeah, so I would entertain a motion if you would like to extend the meeting to 10:15.
I move we extend to 10:15.
Can we real recap here? We just need to get through 7?
We need to get through 8 also.
No, we don't.
No matter what.
We don't need to get through 8. I mean, I think we're resigned to the fact that we'll need to deliberate on 8.
We haven't, we have another meeting that we can deliberate on.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Do we want to try to get through 7?
Why don't we just get through 7.38 and then just call it good? So we'll say 10:15 and we'll call it good after that. Does that sound good, Chair?
It's not gonna take
There's a motion pending.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Do I have a second to extend the meeting to 10:15?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? First ayes have it.
I can't wait to read those notes. I'm going to say,
Okay,
Yes,
let's-
document, I am against
I understand.
extending
I understand what you're
meetings.
saying, and let's see if we can just finish up 7.3 and then decide whether we
okay.
That's fine.
So why don't you
Okay,
say
so
what
in
you
my
would like that-
hypothetical condition is, I forget about frequent bus service corridors. In a situation where you have a apartment complex with a higher density, you've allowed for a reduction in the required amount of off-street parking.
So,
Only if it's close enough to a light rail line or a frequent bus corridor.
Sure, fine, but you've allowed that reduction. So if it's 100 units, but it's, it's Axle Tree, it's right next to, and you've allowed them to reduce by 50%.
Uh-huh.
What happens if you have folks not using the light rail?
Then they park their cars all over the street.
Right, and then we have the problem we've seen.
I hear you.
So,
That's one of the major things.
the data here shows that people can actually substitute bus trips for car trips and will when the buses actually run frequently.
but
You
what
will
people are
capture
doing
more
is they're
people.
parking, the max park and ride stations all fill up. People are parking in neighborhoods. They're doubling up in neighborhoods. They're double parking. I've got people on my neighborhood who are putting cones around their spots, so you can't park there.
I guess I would point out a couple of things. One, that, I think this level of detail you get to in the development code, and two, if we're talking about on-street parking, that is public parking. So, if the city has policy that points to wanting to encourage transit use, and incentivize development adjacent to high-capacity transit corridors and light rail stations, and it ends up that all the residents have at least one car or two cars, and they start parking on public on-street parking, one, that is public parking, and two, there would be mechanisms for the city to, there would be programs that could be implemented if the city saw that as a problem. I think it's just...
We have parking districts that we can create. There's a section in the code that will allow you to have neighborhood resident parking.
And this is also, this is the section for sustainability, not for livability. There's a section for livability, which will address parking, access, the livability concerns. But for sustainability purposes, then yes, reducing parking is consistent with that goal.
I would just note that, if we're not going to reduce parking in multifamily residential developments in our downtown because of the fear that people are still going to have cars, we're not going to reduce parking anywhere in the city.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why light rail makes sense.
Mr. Kroska, public testimony is closed.
Sorry, that applies to the entire
Public testimony is closed. Thank you.
30-second of it now.
The problem is not the light rail. The problem is the corridors. They're the bus transit corridor, and this is something new. That is not currently in our code. The code for a 50% reduction is already there for the light rail station. It's not there for the frequent bus.
There are reductions in some of the other zones within the NMU zone, within some of the other zones where we do allow for reductions. I'd have to look at the development code to see what the specific permitted reduction is, but it would be, there's frequent transit service that runs along 32nd Avenue. There's an NMU zone that is along 32nd Avenue. So, for example, there is a potential application there along 32nd Avenue, and they would be eligible for a parking reduction because of their proximity. No?
Not on 32nd.
Not on 32nd?
No.
Okay, not currently on 32nd. There are other sections of the city where we do allow for reductions.
And I don't think it's a 50%, Greg.
Yeah, it is.
I don't think so.
Well,
It's a 0.5 to, it's a 0.5 ratio to units, when it should be a 1-to-1.
I don't
Or,
think it's- I don't think
the
it's
other
a-
ones are 1-to-1.
I don't think it's that much.
The policy
let me-
doesn't call for a specific
wrong, but I don't-
number.
Let me offer that we've got into a lot of detail here. And I'd like for us to back up for a minute and just look at the original statements. And it doesn't mean we don't want to add anything or change anything. We can still do that. But I think that we're going down a level of detail here that's probably too finite for this document.
Okay. I would recommend that we cross off frequent bus service corridors.
It's too important.
I disagree. I think it's too important.
We can't neuter ourselves and prevent ourselves from accomplishing our goals. I mean, this is, so wealthy people can afford to live near the max light rail station, but the frequent bus corridors are for this is how we distribute transit equitably across the city, not by making people who can't barely afford it pay for parking that they're not going to use. I mean, it's so important to have this tool available to us as we move forward into the implementation phase. It may, and ultimately, it needs to be an orderly transition from everybody drives and everybody parks to fewer people drive and fewer people need to park. But at the same, we can't cross that off the list. It's too important to the overall equity goals of getting people across the whole city to be able to have places they can afford to live without a car.
I hear you.
Just too important.
I hear you, but I think what the problems have, what the citizens have problems with, the residents that we heard that come testify, is that if you look at 7.38 and 7.39, so what you do is allow for a reduction in off-street parking, which means that you have to build, that you don't have to necessarily build a driveway if you're on a frequent bus service corridor. Then the next thing says, advocate for additional frequent transit services in areas with for significant residential growth. What people hear is that they hear, oh crap, if I live on a frequent transit corridor, then we can have apartment buildings because they're going to upzone the whole thing. And then they're going to advocate for more so that they're just going to upzone the whole entire city. That is the fear. I understand what your logic is. I know what my logic is. I'm not necessarily aligned with the way that they think, but I understand where they're coming from. The fear factor is there. The fear factor is there.
We have to be able to rely on the science to help us make the right decisions. And there is plenty of data that justifies making this choice, and I think that this is really critical to the overall equity and affordability strategy in a sustainability context.
Now, what I really know is that TriMet is so slow in doing anything that it's probably going to take 15 years to get another frequent bus service line through.
Maybe.
So, it's really actually out of the city's hands to be able to do that. You actually have to have the density first, probably.
Usually.
and that's why I say, you know what, if we cross off the frequent bus service corridors, then that kind of eases a little bit of the pain. But if everybody else says leave it in, then just say, Greg, shut up, we're going to leave it in.
I really think this is too important. I can't support it without the frequent bus service corridors.
I agree with Commissioner Edge.
Commissioner Burns?
In the end, it's up to, it's a requirement. We're removing a requirement. We're not mandating less parking. It introduces choice, and there are, community members who will choose to not own a car because they can't afford it or because they are mobility impaired. And having lived off of 32nd Avenue, I just don't see this as so problematic. I mean, I'm allow for a reduction in required officers. Yeah, this isn't the end of the world. This is the way that the communities are moving within our urban growth boundary, and I support the statement as written.
I agree.
7.39.
Greg, one more comment. It's 30% in the downtown. That's the maximum.
What's the
Reduction.
what's the unit to car ratio or parking spot?
There's one parking space required per residential unit.
Per unit up to 800 square feet,
Yeah.
and then 1.25 for over 800 square feet.
Not if you're close to the light rail.
No, then you're allowed to have the reduction, but that's the
But
standard.
it's, then what's the number go to? 0.5 or 0.7?
Well, it would go down to 0.7
Oh, okay. All right.
0.7 for the smaller units and
and
a little bit higher.
0.85 for the larger unit.
Okay. Maybe I was adding the two numbers together.
And yeah, there are some,
And at this point, we don't have a proposal for how to treat, like, the corridors.
I understand that.
Right.
3.9.
I'm happy with it.
Any other comments on 3.9?
Yeah, I think it's out of our, out of the cities, but that's why it says advocate, so.
3.10?
Solid.
It's 10 after 10. I don't think we're going to be able to get through 7.4. So in the next meeting, we'll have to finish up 7 and then continue to 8, I guess it is, right?
Yeah.
And then
Those
we have to
actually
do the
match up pretty
goals.
well, I think. They're the same sort of topics.
What'd you say?
We have to do all the goals after
Those
that?
overarching section goals.
Yeah. So
It
I
is,
want to thank everyone.
yeah.
Yeah. Everyone.
Thank
Well,
you.
Chair
for
Massey,
hosting us.
for having to take over into the hot seat, you have done an excellent job. I will
Well, we'll
say
see. Yeah, my tenure is young, yeah.
that. Are we going to run into, are we actually going to have a hearing on February 28th, or are they going to extend it?
We don't have anything yet.
Oh, I thought we did, did I not see one on the,
There's Railroad Ave. Is that just another continue?
so Chair Massey, do you need to continue the public hearing before we move on to the?
Yeah.
I would like to make a motion to continue the public hearing CPA
2019
2019
001
001
to a date certain,
to a date certain of February 28th,
25th.
25th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And let's see. Do the commissioners have any other business or updates?
I just want to let everybody know about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The Milwaukee Historical Society strives very hard to actually live by those standards, and we are celebrating with Oregon Black History Month celebration at the Leading Library, March 4th, 6 p.m. We have 3 wonderful guest speakers with a special introduction by Councilor Faulkner, Libra Ford, who is our first African-American elected woman to the NCSD board, Kim Moreland, who is the Oregon Black Pioneers, and he'll tell us all about Milwaukee's Black history, and the famous Hurtis and Dorothy Hadley, who put a little soul on the roll. They were the first African-American business here in Milwaukee, and he was the first recognized black Oregon pastry chefs, or however he is. So at any rate, it's a good time, it's a fun time. Come on down, admission is free.
Thank you. I know we've touched briefly on what happens next, but is there any forecast for future meetings that we need to know about?
There is an application for a variance at Ardenwall School coming up that wasn't on your calendar. And other than that, we're focused on this for right now.
Understood. Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Again, thank you, everyone. I know that these have been long meetings, but we're coming around the stretch. We're coming around the